Yo, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back. It is a brand new episode of Liam Picks Fights Live. And today on the show, we're doing our first look at UFC 299. The bookmaker can't hold us down. No sickness can hold us down. We're ready to get going today. And we've got a huge pay-per-view slate to break down, guys. 14 fights on tap for this weekend. And they're all high quality, right? This isn't a fight card where we're coming in and we got to, deal with, hey, man, crappy Apex card. Maybe we'll find some value. Maybe we'll find something interesting. Honestly, guys, we got a lot of great fights to discuss. I'm really excited to do so. And we're back in the driver's seat for this week. We had a great week last week. Shout out to Ayman Zahabi, in whom we trust. Plus 600. Some people are giving me grief in the comment section. Liam, why did you spend so long talking about Ayman Zahabi? I hope some people took advantage. I hope some people found the money with me last week there. Plus 600 underdog. We were able to call him outright for our friends over there at Roto Grinders as well. So happy to keep the ball rolling in terms of the underdog calls, but we didn't get everything right. There's always room for improvement, and we've got a great card to break down this week. So if you're new here, welcome aboard. I appreciate you guys being here. Go ahead and drop a like on the video as we get started. Make sure that you have your questions, comments ready to go in the chat, sharpest live chat in the game. Appreciate each and every one of you guys that chose to be a part of it tonight with us. Now, if you're not subscribed to the channel, no problem. Just want to let you know off the rip. Our first look is a little bit more of a cursory glance, right? Sometimes we change our opinion a little bit over the course of the week. So I want to let you guys know right off the rip, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you where my thoughts are right now. We're going to talk about some trends. We're going to talk about the matchups. However, I continue my research process all week. So if you come back on Thursday for Bets and Banter and my opinions change just slightly, I hope you guys understand this is my first look at the card. So with that being said, if you're new to the first look, we always start with the main event of the evening. Where better to start this week than with this title fight? The one that's got everybody's attention, Suga O'Malley back in action, guys. And last time out, I did not have any action on Sean O'Malley when he took on Aljamain Sterling. Now, when you look at that fight on paper, I'll disclose my biases, right? New York State wrestler, okay? Wrestled at the Division III level. Aljamain Sterling, one of the very few UFC champions I've met in person, spoke to him, very nice guy. So I like Aljo, okay? A lot of people not fond of Aljo, no problem there. No skin off my nose, I totally get it. But if you're not an Aljo fan, then maybe you thought to yourself, like, Aljo's just a bum, Sugar's going to crush this guy. If you are an Aljo fan, maybe you thought Aljo's going to run him over. You can never fade an O'Malley in Boston at minus 250. That was the only thing I was sure of. So I did not have any money on Aljamain Sterling, even though I'm a huge fan, even though I cashed on him as a big underdog against Petr Yan, right, when he was getting the title. However, we're now dealing with a situation where Sean O'Malley goes from being a plus 200 underdog, much different proposition. Now he's sitting around a minus 285 favorite in this matchup. So we've seen a huge difference in the public perception, right? Part of that is he's a champion now, right? But also part of that has to be the fact that we've got a guy in Chito Vera who's a little bit lower ranked in the division, right? Chito Vera was maybe not a guy that was being pegged as the next title challenger. I think a lot of people rightly are talking about Merab Dvalishvili and his lengthy win streak. And they're saying, man, this is the guy that should be fighting for the title. However, Sean O'Malley has clout. He's got credibility, right? On the sense that, number one, he beat Petr Yan. That was a real win. That was a credible win. He beat the number one guy. That's how he got the number one ranking. But when you look at how he's progressed since then, right, he goes and gets the win over Aljo. That validates him from a competitive standpoint. Then he starts to call the shots a little bit. He says, hey, listen, I have a loss to this guy. And it's something that you always hear from Dana White, right? He doesn't want to get in the way of two guys that want to do business, right? And when you're talking about a guy in Chito Vera, he does carry his weight promotionally. He's a guy with 1.1 million Instagram followers. He's not some guy that nobody's ever heard of. He's had a lot of fights. He's had a lot of main event experiences as well. So when you look at Marlon Chito Vera, he is going to do his part to sell this fight. He's going to talk a little shit. He's going to get in Sean's face. He's going to have a lot to say. And that's what the UFC is looking for. Let's not pretend that this is just a sport, right? This is an entertainment business. This is a spectacle business. And they're not trying to put you up there for these title shots and these huge opportunities unless you're going to go out there and capitalize, unless you're going to go out there and market yourself, unless you're going to go out there and do the promotional doing, right? Which is talking, saying what you want to do, saying what you're going to be. These kind of things are important, right? And you look at Sean O'Malley, he checks all those boxes, right? When you look at what he does, he talks a lot. He does podcasts. He goes out there. He's constantly communicating with the fans. he has a huge social media following, right? You look at the social media following of all the people on this card, if you rank order them, the second biggest social media account belongs to Sugar Sean O'Malley, and he does not have the second most fights on the card, right? He hasn't been around for as long as a lot of these other guys, but he's already taken that fan base by storm. And here's the thing that I think people maybe don't realize about Sean. If you don't like Sean O'Malley, he's appealing to a demographic that may be younger than you're in, right? I don't get it all with the, rainbow hair and the, smoking weed and the gimmick and the open marriage lifestyle or whatever the hell. Maybe that shit's not for me, right? But for whatever reason, this guy translates for the kids. Sean O'Malley is for the kids, man. These guys like him. The streamer culture, whether that's the stuff he's doing with Sneeko or what the hell is that guy's name, Neon, and all these guys. Again, people I don't know about. I don't give a shit about. They're not going to be for me. But when you're talking about how these people are playing in the mainstream, these are bigger names than most guys in the UFC. So when Sean Strickland can get in there with Sneeko, that's big for their brand. That's big for the UFC. They're happy to have all these random streamers show up at their events. And now we're talking about Miami, Florida. Big fight feel. We're talking about two guys that are going to go in there, put on a show. I think they've got the two right guys for the time. Now, I do think either one of these guys could have their hands full with a Merab Dvalishvili. So right now, it's about how can I get a big win, position myself to try and get the next big fight. If you listen to Sean O'Malley, he's very careful about trying to position his career. And he's not talking about, let's do this Merab fight next. Only after he got some pushback in the media did he even mention the name Merab at all. He's already talking about, let's fight Ilya. Let's go up to 155. Let's get a real big fight going. And frankly, that's a really smart thing for him to be trying to do. Pick his next spot. Find another way to avoid Merab Dvalishvili. Find a way to build your brand and steer your career. Ilya Topuria, that's not a fight that's easy for him to win at all. But it's a fight where if you lose, you have a little bit more of a pre-built excuse. You have a little bit more of that understandable, hey, man, I was willing to be a badass and leave my weight class and go take on a bigger risk, go take on this guy that nobody wants to fight. You always have to think about that when you're talking about the fight game. How can these guys position themselves in their career to be powerful, to have the opportunity to call their own shots? And for Sean O'Malley, he's done everything right so far. He set himself up to get a rematch, right, where he's got a loss on his record. He can now erase that loss from his record. He can make that right in a championship setting, right, in a more meaningful fight. So it's almost like he gets the better win of the two if he's able to get the revenge on Chito Vera in this title fight opportunity. Now, on the other side, he has to, position himself to get Chito Vera, a guy who's not going to necessarily mix in 15 takedown attempts a fight, a guy who doesn't win rounds at a very high clip in the UFC. He mostly relies on getting the finishes, getting these guys out of there, which, again, is that plausible? Is that something he could do? He's proven he could do that to Sean O'Malley. He got him out of there in the very first round. But is that replicable? Is that something he could do multiple times? Well, that's becoming the interesting question this weekend. So I am seeing a lot of mixed takes on this fight, right? I'm seeing some people I like and respect that are saying this is so clearly a Chito Vera spot. He's a big underdog. How could you go wrong? He already beat this guy once. And then on the other side, some people are just like foregone conclusion. O'Malley by decision. He's going to dance around him for the full 25 minutes. So I could honestly see this fight playing out a lot of different directions. But here's some of the things that I haven't heard talk about. I think number one, what does this fight look like if it does get to the ground? We did see this fight end up in a guard situation pretty early on. And last time out, I think that Sean O'Malley was a fraction of where he's at on the ground today. He does have a good jiu-jitsu instructor. He does work on his ground game quite a bit. And there were sequences I saw in the Yan fight that made me think this guy has better grappling than I was previously aware of, right? The way he was hitting the switch, the way he was able to roll through on some of those positions. I do think that Marlon Chito Vera may try to mix in some takedowns here. If you guys remember, before he was known for his elusive style on the outside and dropping all these people with big shots, he was known for being a guy who could operate from the clinch and have very good Brazilian jiu-jitsu. So when you look at Chito's fallback, what is he going to look to do in a fight like this, where you have a title fight on the line? He might try and go back to some of those elements. He's got an excellent ability to control people when he gets a hold of the collar tie, and he does a good job as well trapping the arm on the inside. When he does that, he throws vicious knees to the body. He can also use that to try and create back exposure. But on the other side of things, I think Sean O'Malley is a guy who's got an excellent guillotine choke. I don't think that Chito's going to want to duck his head into the clinch here because that would be a little bit reckless. Now, I think that for Sean O'Malley, what he's done much better in some of his recent fights is he's been dictating the range. He uses his hand fighting ability and his feints, his deception, his speed, and his timing. He uses that to get people out of position. He uses it to touch, and go. And in this spot, I do think he has an ability to make Chito miss. I do wonder, though, can he sustain the backwards movement for the full 25 minutes? That, for me, is the distinguishing factor in this fight. The guys that have given him problems at times in the past, a Chris Mutino, I know this will sound ridiculous because he did put an absolute beatdown on Chris Mutino, but the one thing Chris had success with is moving Sean backwards. He continuously came forward and was willing to eat whatever Sean was producing to keep the fight going. Now, was that hazardous to his own health? Yes, it was. And did he end up taking a massive beatdown in that spot as a result? Yes, he did. But what we saw from Chris Mutino is he was able to get Sean breathing pretty heavy in that fight. He was able to get him moving backwards the whole time. And anybody can tell you, it's one thing to move forward, right? To run a marathon going in one direction, but to do it all going backwards is a lot harder and it can exhaust you a little bit more quickly. So I think part of the key to success here for Sean O'Malley has to be finding those moments where he can hold his ground or he can push Chito back. And I do think we've seen a lot of times where Chito Vera can be pushed back inside of the octagon. We've seen guys have success moving Chito around, whether that's with their superior footwork, like Corey Sandhagen, or with their own ability to wrestle and press. And Corey was able to mix in some of those opportunities as well. So I think that for Sean, he's got to use the length of his frame, his kicks, and he's got to make sure he doesn't take too many hard shots to the legs. Sometimes Sean, with that bladed stance, with the willingness to box, it leaves his legs in range as the last thing, that people can try and target. You see guys like Henry Cejudo have success against Dominic Cruz by going after his legs, even after they start to exit the exchange. I think that for Chito Vera, that's what he has to try and do to Sean O'Malley in this fight. He's got to try and get Sean to compromise his footwork because Chito is just not on the same level of footwork as somebody like Sean. And so he will be forced to follow and miss for a lot of the fight, especially early, I believe, if he's not able to get to the legs of O'Malley. So am I saying that I think O'Malley is like a great lay at minus 300? No, I do think that in a title fight like this, in a fight where you've got somebody who could be potentially slowing down a little bit over the course of the 25 minutes, that could be a point of concern when you get to this price range. But I do think that Sean O'Malley is a deserved favorite in this spot. Despite having lost the first matchup, I think he's a deserved favorite because of the footwork. I think he's a deserved favorite because of the championship confidence. And I also think he's got a well-rounded game. He continues to improve all the time. And I don't expect the exact same version of Sean that showed up in that first matchup. So for me, this is a spot where I am expecting and still Sean O'Malley to get the job done. How he gets the job done, still something that's a little up in the air for me. Does he close the show on a guy like Chito Vera, extremely tough guy? I don't think that he does, but I'm not sure. I do think that when we look at Chito Vera, there's been a couple times where he's gotten down on himself inside of the fight. I thought that the fight that really concerns me for him here is that Corey Sandhagen look. I thought that Corey broke him mentally in that fight. I thought that he showed him the levels to the game. And for me, I do think that the price is a little bit, wider than you expect here. Shout out to my guy Balboa, very sharp individual in the chat. One of my teammates over at the Fury Fight Pick Network. But when we're looking at this fight, guys, I do say to myself, I understand what the UFC is trying to do here. I do believe they're trying to position a guy like Sean O'Malley to take that next step forward in his career, to become a bigger star. And they've also got, no bad option, right? If Chito Vera is able to get the job done, if he's able to come through for Ecuador in Miami, I know that it's going to be a damn fiesta. So absolutely a great title fight, a worthy fight. I think it deserves and commands our attention. But for me, I'm leaning towards Sean O'Malley to get the job done. Whether that's late with a finish or via decision. Great fight, though, and something I'm going to continue to think about over the course of the week. And I want to make sure that I see that money come in on Chito Vera, especially if I was in any way involved on the Sean O'Malley side, because I have seen a lot of early money come in on Sean O'Malley. I'm sure there will be more of that. But I also think we've seen a lot of dogs coming through in these UFC main events to start the year. I think eventually that trend is going to have to regress, but will it start Saturday night? We just don't know. So fantastic fight, fantastic matchmaking, 365 people rocking with us live. I appreciate each and every damn one of you. Make sure that you drop a like on the video as we move to the co-main event of the evening, where we've got a lightweight matchup that is absolutely fireworks. We've got Dustin, the Diamond Poirier, stepping back in. He's taking on Benoit Saint-Denis. Oh my goodness, the God of War. He's back, baby. I've never lost a bet on Benoit Saint-Denis. When he first came to the UFC, guys, this is a person that I thought great skills. Everything looks good on paper, but they're giving him Elizeu Zaleski dos Santos up a weight class. That is an absolute brutalization waiting to happen. So I had a lot of money on Easy dos Santos, guys. I also had a bunch of money on Easy dos Santos ITD, and they robbed me blind. One of the most brutal beatdowns you'll ever see in the UFC. But what did you learn about Benoit Saint-Denis that night? You got to kill the man. You have to kill this man to put him down. He is not a man that will simply fold up the shop or quit when the going gets tough. And in this cage fighting business, guys, half of the time, you just want to know that the fighter is going to go out there and give you everything, because sometimes you can handicap the skills, you can handicap the attributes, the physicality, but what ends up happening is the fighter just doesn't want it as bad as their opponent. And that sounds silly, but I've seen it myself as a competitor. I know there have been times where I wanted it more than the other person. That's what it took. It was not simply that I had more skill. And the same thing can be said in so many cage fights that you see on a Saturday night, where one guy is clearly better in terms of the skills, the techniques, he has more knowledge, and he just can't push as hard as his opponent for that victory. So I think that one thing I've learned about this guy, Benoit Saint-Denis, is his will to win is on 100%. It is dialed all the way up. His will to compete is the same. It's dialed all the way up. This guy will not quit on you. He will fight hard until the bitter end. That's a soldier, right? This is a special forces soldier, and you could tell when you watch him compete, right? This is a guy that is going out there blood and guts for the glory. Now, when you look at his MMA career, he has not been fighting for a fraction of the time as Dustin Poirier. Dustin Poirier has been around for a very long time. He's been fighting in the UFC at the highest level for a very long time. This is a guy who cut his teeth. Most people may not know this in the featherweight division, right? This is not a guy who cut his teeth at 155 in the UFC. He has become an all-time great lightweight since he had a great career in the featherweight division. That's where he first met Conor McGregor. That's where he first met Max Holloway. So you see, this is a guy in Dustin Poirier who has a lineage in the UFC. He's got a story in the UFC. He's got an absolute, fantastic background. He's one of the better boxers that you'll see in the UFC. He does a great job landing with powerful shots. He does a great job setting up his offense in the pocket. And also, we've seen Dustin Poirier push to the edge. We've seen Dustin Poirier in serious, hard fights, blood and guts wars. And we've seen him find a way to persevere, deal with those difficult spots, and find a way to survive and advance. The Dan Hooker fight is one of those fights that comes to mind, right? We've seen Dan Hooker stand in the pocket, landing shot after shot in round 2. And then what did we see? We saw that he was able to rally, come back from that, and then break Dan Hooker down the stretch, brutalize him, send him to the hospital. So this is the guy in Dustin Poirier who plays for keeps, right? We got to know that coming in. Both of these guys are absolute savages. Let's acknowledge that off the rip. And if you think one of these guys to push over a bum, I think you just don't understand fighting, right? I think that there's a reason that you take a guy like Benoit Saint-Denis and you shoot his ass up the card. And I truly believe the reason is he goes out there and puts on the exact kinds of fights that Dana White wants to see, right? This is what Dana's trying to pay for, right? He's looking for guys that'll stand in the middle, throw crazy bombs. They have skills in all positions. They're not going to quit on themselves, and they're trying to win by any means necessary. They're trying to finish fights. That's what he likes. That's what he's trying to pay for. And by the way, Dustin Poirier has been doing the same damn thing. If you look, I've never bet on Dustin Poirier one time in my life. I'll level with you guys. I've never bet on the guy one time in my life. What I have done, right, is I've bet on the unders, the violence props, the fight not to go the distance. That's how I've made a lot of money betting on Dustin Poirier throughout his career. I think 14 plus units on the prop market betting this guy. And some of that was the ends by sub in the Chandler fight. Some of that was Charles Oliveira, ITD, and by submission against this guy. But basically speaking, I have not been a guy that has, looked to get on the same side as Dustin Poirier, but I've had enough respect for his game to say this guy is forcing violent finishes out of the fights, right? And when I'm looking at a fight like this, I see two guys that are both capable of violent finishes. If I was to anticipate how this could go wrong for Benoit Saint-Denis, I think the most obvious way he loses his fight is simple. He gets knocked out by a guy who's a very good boxer, who's very clean, who's been in a lot of boxing exchanges in the UFC, and who could find his chin. And Benoit Saint-Denis, you see in his fights, he's bleeding out of the mouth. He gets punched in the face. You know that Benoit Saint-Denis is not afraid of the scrap. Now, when you look at how he responds, I think normally he does not care about getting hit. I think most of the time, the way he responds to getting hit is a good thing. However, we have seen him rocked and wobbled. We can't pretend that we haven't seen that. So when you've seen a guy get hurt, you know that he can be clipped, he can be knocked out. And by the way, I just acknowledged he should have been stopped against Elysée Zaleski dos Santos. But now let's not pretend that Elysée Zaleski dos Santos is a bum, like some people have been doing online. That's just criminal. You're telling on yourself if you think that he's a bum, right? What you know about a guy like this is that he is a murderer, right? He's knocked out Sean Strickland, the champion at 185 pounds. So Elysée Zaleski dos Santos, big guy, strong guy. I think he's lost 3 times in the UFC. He has an elite record, truthfully. But when you look at that fight, it was just too much too soon. It was the fact that he's up a weight class. This is a guy that's competed a lot at 170, at 165 at these catchweights. And so I do think at 155, Benoit Saint-Denis is a physical hoss. He's very difficult for these guys to deal with. I was quite sure that he was going to go out there and bully Thiago Moises. And the reason I felt that way was because this is a guy in Thiago Moises that we've seen wilt under pressure, right? We've seen that Thiago Moises very skilled, very talented. He's got a lot of abilities. But when he got confronted by a guy in Joel Alvarez who had no respect for him, who came forward and beat him up like he had nothing to offer him, he got cleaned up, right? He did not have any answer to that pressure. So I thought that Benoit Saint-Denis was in a great spot to go out there and defeat him. Now, when you look at how he was able to do it, that's where it becomes even more impressive. I thought he was going to beat him up. I thought he was going to beat him up on the feet, and he beat him up until he was able to submit the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner, the guy who was able to give Islam Makhachev 4 decent rounds, guys. If you don't remember that fight, I had said at the time, I thought, Thiago Moises might be able to give Islam something just because he's so good at Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. But in that fight, he was not able to, continue the pace that he needed to continue up with Islam. But he did come close to a couple of takedowns, right? He did have some interesting grappling sequences with Islam, but Islam's motor was way too much for Thiago Moises. But it still took him 3, 4, 5 rounds of action to really get to that point, that breaking point. And Benoit Saint-Denis, he does a lot of things on hyperdrive, right? He likes to get that gas out process, that chaotic situation. He likes to get that going right from Jump Street. And I do think that you see a certain calm in the storm from a soldier that you don't see even from a normal cage fighter, right? I do think that this guy, Benoit Saint-Denis, is like, yeah, I mean, if I get punched in the face, so what? Like somebody tried to shoot me in Mali once. Like, I'm all right. So I feel like this is a guy that when the going gets tough, he stands in the pocket and looks for his next great opportunity. And sometimes that will get him cracked. He will get hit with big shots. But what I've seen from him is an ability to rally and an ability to shoot takedowns. The thing about this fight is that I don't believe Dustin Poirier can stop the takedowns of Benoit Saint-Denis, especially, early in the fight. If this guy is looking for them with full acclaim, strength, I think he could pick up Dustin Poirier and slam him on his head. I truly believe that. He is built freakishly strong. On top of that, I do believe that when you look at the sequencing from Dustin Poirier that's concerning, I think his hips have gotten a lot worse over time, right? He's a guy that's dealt with a lot of injuries. Like I mentioned, he's been fighting forever. And so there's costs and benefits to fighting for a long time, right? Dustin, in terms of the things that he has, experience out the wazoo, tons of great, abilities. But what I've also seen is a guy that's hips, right, are starting to really get tight. He's starting to get a little bit slower in transition in the grappling. And guys that have taken his back have always given him problems, right? Michael Chandler was fish hooking him and gouging his eyes and doing all these other stupid things instead of just holding a seatbelt grip around the chest and then submitting him, right? You saw that he still gave up bad positions in that fight. And for me, there's a lot of things that go into handicapping a fight like this. But I think that Benoit Saint-Denis has paths, right? I believe he is capable of knocking out Dustin Poirier, because Dustin Poirier was knocked out in his last fight, right? We've seen proof of concept. Justin Gaethje, powerful head kick, was able to put him down. If y'all saw the last fight from Benoit Saint-Denis, he was able to head kick Matt Frevola into the third row. And Matt Frevola is a very talented fighter, very skilled fighter. And I had picked in that fight Benoit Saint-Denis by knockout in round one or by split decision. And the reason that I said that is what we saw in the ground exchanges, right? They had crazy, frenetic ground exchanges. But even there, when you saw Benoit Saint-Denis get put on his back, he hits a beautiful elevator sweep. He has an underhook and an overhook working together. He butterfly hooks the leg at the waist. And Matt Frevola, guys, is a very sound grappler, okay? Matt Frevola easily out-grappled Jailton Turner in the UFC. He's he's kept in the grappling with Arman Tsarukyan for the full 15 minutes, right? This is a guy who's very talented and capable on the ground. And he got swept, then he got kicked in the head. So I do believe that this guy, Benoit Saint-Denis, is getting better and better and better every fight. I thought that his grappling looked sensational there. And I do think that his grappling is something that's a little bit unheralded. Yes, he was able to submit Thiago Moises, and I think he gets the correct acclaim there. Shout out to Balboa, said same. He was on BSD sub 2, I believe, against Thiago Moises. Great call in that spot. But I think of a guy like Dustin Poirier as a guy that can be taken down, right? I think he can be put in some compromised grappling positions, and I think he can be clipped on the chin here. So then the question becomes, does he have the same ability to out-grapple Benoit Saint-Denis? And yes, he is a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, and yes, he's been around for a long time, but I'd be frankly very surprised if he out-grappled Benoit Saint-Denis, if he out-wrestled Benoit Saint-Denis. I think the physical gap is significant between the two men at this stage of their career. And so for me, that's going to be the ultimate X factor in this fight. Now, you're looking at a minus 225 favorite on a guy who is not nearly as proven as Dustin Poirier. So obviously the line has reacted massively in this spot going towards Benoit Saint-Denis. And maybe there does come a point of diminishing returns. But I just got to say, shout out to the 500 people rocking with us live. I want to say this is a new record for the show. God bless you all. I'm so glad that you guys decided to join me, and I'm having a blast breaking down these fights. So thank you all. Make sure you drop a like as we keep it going here. But for me, guys, I have said this before, and I truly believe that Benoit Saint-Denis is one of the best chances for France to have a world champion in mixed martial arts at this level. I believe that because of his physical attributes. I believe that because of his backing within his country. I believe that because of how he conducts himself inside and outside the cage. So I truly believe this is a guy that has all the ability in the world. Does he capitalize on that this Saturday? He's got a lot of pressure on his back. He's got a big moment, a big spot, a big opportunity. I truly believe he's going to blast through Dustin Poirier and get this win and this finish. I would not be stunned if Dustin Poirier decided to wrap it up and call it a career. This is a guy who's been fighting a very long time. I've been listening to his interviews and what he's been saying. And it's not like he's saying, I'm not going to go out there and try my best. I'm going to, phone it in. But what he's also saying is, I'm getting close to the end. I'm getting to the point where I know every fight could be my last. And that's not the thing that I want to hear from my guys as I'm backing them going into this crazy, frenetic fight, right? Because if you could see the exit at all, you might take the exit at some point in a fight. Unfortunately or fortunately, depending on your perspective. But when I'm looking at a guy who I need to go through the fire, who I need to find a way to win, I want the guy who's younger. I want the guy who's a soldier. I want the guy who is all in on his career. I want the guy who hasn't been doing this 20 years. I want the guy who's got 20 more years left in him. And I think that this guy, Benoit Saint-Denis, is built differently. So for me, I'm thinking that Benoit Saint-Denis is going to get the job done, but I think it's a hell of a fight. I don't think it's a pushover. I think Dustin, if he's going to go out, I don't think he's going out soft. I think he's going out in a blaze of glory, throwing hands in the pocket like a man. I think he's going out, in a fashion where, hey, blood and guts till the end. Didn't work out tonight, but thanks for all the memories. This is a guy that's trained a lot of his life in South Florida. I do think there's going to be a lot of people in the building supporting him, but I think there's going to be a lot of people in the building supporting Benoit Saint-Denis. And I think that this is a man on a mission, a man that will be hard to deny on Saturday night. Benoit Saint-Denis is my pick in the co-main event of the evening. Next up, guys, we've got a 170-pound bout between Kevin Big Mouth Holland and Michael Venom Page. What a fight, guys. What a fight card. I got to just say right off the rip here that Kevin Holland, one of my most profitable fighters in the UFC, yet I don't have strong feelings about this matchup, right? So that's not a feeling that I like to have here, but I'll always be truthful with you guys. So if I feel it, I'll say it. And if I don't feel it, I'll let you know that too. And I don't know exactly how to feel about this matchup because the truth is Kevin Holland is a guy that I've found many opportunities to back and fade throughout his career, right? When you look at the Derek Brunson spot, I thought that was a great opportunity to fade him, a guy that could wrestle, a guy that could grapple, plus 150. I had Derek Brunson in that spot. Great cash. But more often than not, I'm looking to be on Team Big Mouth. I like Kevin Holland. I think he is a great fighter at his best. I think when we've seen Kevin Holland go out there and show his skills, he has an ability to throw good hands. He's got an ability to land shots that hurt people, that impact them, that back them up. And we've also seen Kevin not a complete pushover in the grappling. He's been taken down. He's been beaten up on the ground before. He's been held down, especially at middleweight, especially by these 185-pounders. But at 170, he's been a little bit more dynamic. And I've cashed in on Kevin Holland by sub, plus 900, plus 700, plus 850. Great spots in the past. But this is a spot where Michael Venom Page is a brand new signing for the UFC, already getting put into a featured bout. Now, I want to just let you guys know that people that don't watch the UFC for a really long time, you should know coming in that we've seen times in the past where guys come in and the UFC signs them, pay them a bunch of money, even if they go on to have a successful career, like Eddie Alvarez. They don't always win that first fight. You know, the UFC kind of has this weird thing where they try and put people in and give them some tough fights. But I think that when you put together a fight and you take a guy like Kevin Holland's like the ultimate company guy, right? He says yes to everybody that they want to fight, right? Jack Della Maddelena last time out, right? Tough assignment for Kevin. He just says yes to virtually anything they offer him. But the things that concern me about Kevin Holland, the things that piss me off, frankly, let's just call it how it is. It pisses me off that Kevin Holland doesn't take his own career seriously. It pisses me off that Kevin Holland goes out there and gives himself less of a chance to win the fight than he really has. Against Wonderboy, guys, he had Wonderboy dead to rights. I'll just say it. He had Wonderboy in positions where he could have easily hopped on his back, sunk in 2 hooks, and finished him. But what did he do instead? He let him back up to his feet. He said, hey, buddy, let's go film another tequila commercial. Let me pick you up off the ground and play grab ass in the park. And when you do shit like that in a cage fight, you don't always win the fight, right? Then Wonderboy was like, yeah, no more friendship for me. I'm going to punch you in the face and finish this thing. And he was able to get Kevin out of there, right? When you look at Kevin's overall demeanor, he doesn't take fighting seriously enough for me. You know, he's a little too lackadaisical. He's a little bit too, haphazard about his results, about his career. You look at the win-loss ledger, right? It'll tell you everything you need to know. 25-10. Is he a 10-loss fighter in terms of his skill? No. The truth is no. Kevin Holland should not have 10 losses as a professional. But the truth is he goes out there and he doesn't give himself an optimal chance to win fights. So for me, that's the thing that pisses me off. And that's the thing I can't support, right? We're also talking not about, hey, minus 110 in either direction. You know, we're talking about laying 55%, minus 125, minus 130, that Kevin Holland goes out there and gets the win. And so I can totally understand the logical case for Kevin Holland, right? Younger, more dynamic, should be faster, should be in better shape, can mix up the game, fought way higher level of competition in the UFC. But now let's talk about Michael Venom Page, guys. And let's talk about the win-loss rate. 21-2 as a professional. This is not a guy that's going out there and phoning it in and not caring about the results. You could say to a fault, he, made this record a little bit nicer than it should be, right? He was a little bit caring too much about the wins and losses, stuck around maybe in Bellator a little bit too long. But overall, Michael Venom Page is a guy that has not lost a lot of fights. He's lost one time inside the distance. I think that truly that's one of the greatest knockouts you will ever see. Michael Venom Page against Douglas Lima. Douglas Lima kicks the leg out from under him, hits him with that uppercut from hell as he's falling down. What a sensational knockout. You just have to take your hat off to Douglas for that. That's a great knockout. And frankly, Michael was out there, willing to go back and do the rematch and, gets the win via split decision. So he is a guy that fights close, especially in these longer 5-round fights, right? He does not always put a stamp on it, But we've also seen he can go out there and put on a highlight reel. He can go out there, style on somebody, get the finish. When you look at MVP as well, never been submitted in his professional career. Even fought a guy like Logan Storley, top guy in Bellator, right? Guy that had some real skills. He was able to go out there, did not get finished in that fight, did keep it very close, lost a split decision overall in that fight. So I think Michael Page is slowing down a little bit over the course of his career. I do think we've seen him at times gas out in later fights, right? In longer fights, especially. But now he's got 15 minutes in this spot with which to work. And I do think that in a 15-minute fight, it could turn into a little bit of dancing, a little bit of high-fiving, a little bit of low-rate sparring. And if that's the case, it could be another Kevin Holland split decision loss, right? I also think of the fact that this is a guy in Kevin Holland who we've seen make a lot of mistakes in the grappling, even against lower-level fighters, where he's given up his back. He's given himself a lot of bad positions. And I do think Michael Page is not known for his, exquisite grappling techniques, but he can be opportunistic at times with his submission threat. So I wouldn't want to give my back to somebody like Michael Venom Page. He's a long guy. He does work with good fighters over there in England, trying to get that grappling game together. So I think that this is a guy in Michael Venom Page who the UFC is probably parting ways with a decent amount of money to bring him in, if they're going to bring him in at this stage at all. And so 21-2 as a pro, I do think they probably prefer if he was able to get the nod over Kevin, right? And I don't know that to be true, but that's just the way I see it from a business standpoint, from an investment standpoint. Do they want to discredit a guy like Michael Venom Page? That's the other, option, right? Do they want to bring him in and be like, hey, this is the guy you all thought was serious? Watch Kevin Holland style on his ass. He's got 10 losses over here. That's the other way you could play this. But I don't know that I have a strong feeling here, right? And when I don't have a strong feeling, it's going to take a dog or pass situation for me, right? So that's my problem. It's like, I don't feel bullish on going to fade Kevin, right? I like Kevin. He's a guy I want to support. I want to back him. But I need to see more. I need to see Kevin take his own career more seriously. And I need to see him show, hey, I'm not just here to, have fun and run out there and do jobs for the company. I'm here to, prove something to myself. But I haven't seen enough of that lately. So for me, gut says Michael Venom Page by split decision is what we might be looking at here on Saturday night. But I'm going to give more thought to this one. I just want to say, though, 17-2 over in Bellator, that's a hell of a record to put together in any organization. And he did fight some of the more serious guys later on in his career. So not going to say that Michael Venom Page has done it all the right way, but I do think at 37 years of age, time to S or get off the pot, right? And I think that this is a winnable matchup for him in his first UFC opportunity. So let's see what happens here. But I'm going to be rooting for Big Mouth because it'd be nice to see him get back on track. But for me, I gotta see it to believe it right now. Next up, folks, we got a hell of a card, and we got a hell of a scrap at 170, a welterweight contest. Gilbert Darino Burns taking on Jack Della Maddelena. It's a sip of the coffee, and we're off to work. Let's do it. So, guys, this is a matchup where I'm looking, and I'm saying to myself, okay, we got two great fighters here, but we got one guy who's a lot closer to his physical prime. That's Jack Della Maddelena, right? 27 years of age, taking on the 37-year-old in Gilbert Darino Burns. And we have to remember, guys, Gilbert is in fact coming back off a pretty serious underperformance against Belal Muhammad, a performance where he got injured early on. He got stuffed on a lot of his takedown attempts. And frankly, this is my personal opinion, he looked broken very early in that fight. I thought that Belal styled on him in that fight. And I wanted to bet Belal Muhammad in that fight with Gilbert Burns. And what had stopped me from doing so is that I saw he had an injury, right? I could tell that Belal was moving weird on his foot. I believe my guy Moise Audio pointed it out as well. A couple really sharp observers said, hey, man, this guy Belal looks like he's got an injury. And I did my research. I did my due diligence. I checked. I looked at his foot. I looked at all the pictures, the evidence I could find, the weigh-in. And I was convinced that Belal Muhammad had a messed up foot, right? I thought he had a broken foot. His foot looked swollen. It was the size of a balloon, like Conor McGregor said, right? This guy had a really seriously injured foot coming into the Gilbert Burns fight. So Gilbert can say he had the shoulder injury or whatever he had going on midway into the fight. But what we know is that Belal was seriously injured before the fight, and he was able to find a way through it and dominate the fight throughout. So for me, I thought that what we know about Gilbert Burns is that he is a fantastic grappler, but he did come up in the circuit, guys, at 155 pounds in the UFC. This is not a guy who spent his entire career at 170, right? And I think that Gilbert Burns has very good, foundational jiu-jitsu, but he does some things very well from the guard, right? He likes that armbar series, for example, and that shit's just not going to work, I don't believe, against a guy like Jack. When we look at the fact that Gilbert has only submitted one welterweight in the UFC, that was Neil Magny. And by the way, I bet him to do so at plus 230 in that spot, because that's a levels game, right? You take a guy like Neil Magny, and I've always said, with no disrespect to Neil Magny, he's a fish at the welterweight elite level for jiu-jitsu, right? If you just have elite jiu-jitsu, you're going to be able to submit a guy like Neil Magny. Just that's the way that it is. And you've seen videos online of Khamzat Chimaev like sitting on Neil Magny's chest, just looking around, falling back to the, triangle choke, like very low effort submitting Neil Magny from him. Just he was way ahead of him in terms of the skill, in terms of the athleticism, the progressions. It was just not going to be close, right? And Neil has some uniquely susceptible features. RDA, a guy who's a former 155-pounder, took him to the ground and easily submitted him, right? So I just said to myself, what does RDA do different than Gilbert Burns? Like, he's going to just do the exact same thing. And he did. But when you look, that's the only guy at 170 that Gilbert's ever dominated like that in the wrestling and the grappling, right? He was able to take down Wonderboy. Frankly, he had a much less dominant showing against Wonderboy than Belal Muhammad. And that was what made me think Belal Muhammad was going to beat him. So I now look at this fight and I say to myself, you listen to Belal Muhammad and what he had to say about this matchup. He said, Jack, Gilbert sucks. Sprawl, defend the takedown. He's not going to do shit. I mean, it sounds rude, but like, I feel the same way. Like, I think that Gilbert can land big shots on the feet, right? He does commit to his power. He likes to sit there, throw some of the wider hooks, but who is he knocking out at 170? Who's he dropping and hurting at 170? The washed Tyron Woodleys of the world, the completely washed, who I desperately love, Damian Maia. He was 41 years of age and couldn't have been more washed at the time that they fought. I mean, I just think that when I'm looking at a lot of the wins for Gilbert, I think a lot of his run at 170 is manufactured, right? I just don't see it. And I think that his best, showing might have been against Kamaru Usman, where he hurts him early and he's coming forward and he completely gassed out in that fight, guys. He was dead tired by the time that fight finished. And he was also getting beat up, by the hands of Kamaru Usman. He was getting dropped and hurt there. So I think Tristan makes a good point. He dropped Chimaev, right? He does have some power. We've seen that. But I also think Chimaev got a little bit tired in there. I think Chimaev, here's the difference, right? Chimaev likes to go out there and he needs to get takedowns, right? He needs to get on top of people to feel good. If you look at that Kamaru Usman fight, where did he look good and feel good? When he got the takedowns, when he was on top, he looked dominant, he looked strong, he looked like he was a real danger to finish the fight. When it was two guys standing on the feet, it looked much more like a 50-50 even fight. Chimaev is still a work in progress on the feet. He's still getting more confident on the feet. Think of Muhammad Mokaev, another guy, right? That's not looking as dominant on top, but is looking that same kind of deer in the headlights when he's forced to strike on the feet for prolonged periods of time. When you're looking at a guy like Chimaev, I truly believe the detail people miss about that fight with Gilbert Burns is Chimaev took him to the ground and Gilbert started to threaten with his armbar from guard, with those abilities that he has to reach for overhooks and try and pull him into an extended grappling exchange. And that's where Chimaev just said to himself, let me go path of least resistance. I'm bigger than this guy. I should be able to outlast him on cardio. So instead of dealing with him on the ground and trying to find out what this Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu World Championship is all about, maybe I just get back up to my feet. So you see that Chimaev takes him to the ground, then he gets elbows tight and just hops out of his guard because he wanted no part of Gilbert Burns on the mat. If you're Jack Della in this fight, I think you have the same exact attitude, which is I don't want anything to do with Gilbert on the ground in this fight unless I absolutely have to, because Jack does at times make a little bit mistakes in terms of his aggression, right? He's too willing to go for that guillotine, to go for that guard pull, things that you don't want to see from a guy when he doesn't have to. Jack Della should be keeping fights upright, sprawl, brawl, defend. And if he does that against Gilbert, he should be able to use his jab, use his body work, use his clinical boxing, his low kicks as well to do damage from the outside. And I don't think that Gilbert can create as much damage. I don't think Gilbert can sustain as much damage as a guy like Jack Della, especially where they're at in their career. I think that we see a guy in Gilbert starting to lay the foundations. He's got businesses. He's got other shit going on. He's probably coaching a little bit more. And I think that for a guy like Jack Della, he's all in right now on getting to his shot, getting to his big fights. I think that Gilbert, last time out, that was his chance. That was his ability to go there and get another title fight. I do believe, unfortunately for him, that ship has largely sailed. So unless he can get, a great opportunity, maybe they open that 165 division, something like that. I think that Gilbert is just not equipped to compete with the very top guys at 170. I think that Shavkat Rakhmonov would be a disaster, for example. So I just think that Gilbert's kind of met the end of his rope at 170. I think he had a title opportunity, but when you're having close competitive fights with Jorge Masvidal at this stage of your career, I do think that this is a guy in JDM who's not to be trifled with. I don't think he's a guy that you don't want to mess around with out there because sometimes, he can get into these close split decision type territory, but Basso Hafez is a muscle factory that I thought was going to give him some problems because he was going to go for takedowns relentlessly all night. And I don't see enough of that from Gilbert. I don't think that Gilbert is necessarily able to push that same cardio basis, that same cardio path. So for me, I'm not loving what I'm seeing from Gilbert in the lead up to this fight. And I'm thinking that Jack Della Maddelena is going to get the job done here and should be a hell of a fight. Should be a great scrap. The one concern I'll say is before we move on to the next fight is Jack has been in a couple of near submission, positions, right? We've seen guys get him in that head and arm choke, get him in some dangerous spots. But what we've also seen, a guy that's not going to quit easily, a guy that's not going to give up unless the move is fully cinched. You have him dead to rights. He's not a guy that's quitting on the first sign of adversity. That's something I like to see. He was put in a deep choke. The only time I've ever bet against Jack Della Maddelena, guys, was on the Contender Series. This was a guy that I was like, man, I'm going to bet the plus 130 on Anjos because I don't believe in his grappling. And what did he show me there? He showed me even a minute into that head and arm choke, he's like, nope, I know that you're going to let go. I know you're going to break. And when I get back up, I'm going to make you pay. And he beat the hell out of Anjos when they got back to the feet. So for me, this is a spot where I'm expecting Jack Della to do a lot of damage. And if he finds himself in, difficult positions, I think he's going to find a way to push through. But hell of a scrap. Great fight at 170. And now we're rounding out the main card with a phenomenal fight between Petr Yan and Song Yadong. Oh boy, bantamweight on display. And this is a guy in Petr Yan who has had maybe one of the hardest falls from grace in the sport. I know that people are talking about this guy as a top pound for pound fighter. When he ascended in this sport, takes on Jose Aldo, wins the vacant bantamweight title in that spot. That was after the retirement of Henry Cejudo. And then we see the Aljamain Sterling fiasco, right? We're talking about the one where Aljo went out there and did seem like he was slowing down, did seem like he was having a hard time and started to take a knee, started to get into some of those awkward positions. But then Petr Yan blew it, right? He just had the fight well within hand, started to throw that big knee to the head, and Aljo unable to recover. Fight is ruled a disqualification, and this guy has not been able to get right since. What we saw is that he was then able to get back in there, get the win over Corey Sandhagen. That was an impressive showing. That was a time I actually bet Corey Sandhagen as a plus 2XX underdog against Petr Yan, and Petr Yan showed me, hey, over 5 rounds, I can build up. I can do a great job of landing big, impactful shots. And Corey Sandhagen, it's not many guys that have gone out there and beaten him on the feet, right? Guys that have gone out there and actually beaten him in the striking pretty cleanly. And the combinations from Petr Yan that night were some of the best that we've seen, right? He was throwing spinning shots, spinning hooks into kicks, all sorts of crazy things that he was able to do that night against Corey Sandhagen. That guy, Petr Yan, looked like one of the very best fighters in the world on the night. However, the next fight out, guys, Aljamain Sterling was a plus 270 underdog. One of my most proud bets of all time is Aljamain Sterling in that rematch with Petr Yan. And I'll tell you guys why. I had it all written out on loose leaf paper on freaking my yellow legal pads. Like, if you guys know me, I got legal pads on legal pads full of notes about fighting. And I had all the notes, all the receipts for why I thought it was a good spot for Aljo. And let's start with the beginning. Aljo said I was injured coming into the first fight with Petr Yan. I rewatched the fight, and I believe him. Because if you look at Aljo, guys, you could say a lot of things about Aljo if you love him, if you hate him. But what we can say about Aljo for sure is he's physically strong, right? You look at him, he looks jacked. He looks like he's got a lot of muscle. You've seen him pick people up, slam them, throw them around the octagon. He's very strong. He looked weak physically against Petr Yan the first time they fought. He would grab a hold of him, and Petr Yan would like pick him up and throw him across the octagon, right? Like, he just looked like he had nothing behind what he was doing. And that is not a recipe for success, right? You can't get any respect that way. If you're a wrestler and a grappler, guys, you need strength. You can't have strength. It's going to be very hard for you to get your game going, especially against a resisting opponent. So when we're talking about a guy like Petr Yan, he's strong. He's physical. So if you don't have your own physicality and your tools to match him, it's just going to be a dead letter. So I felt like Aljo getting a surgery, getting that neck surgery, he said he needed it, and I believed him, and I was willing to give him a chance because what I saw wasn't the guy that I knew. It was not the guy that I knew his capabilities inside the octagon to wrestle, to grapple, to grab a hold of his opponent and dominate physically. So that was the start of the handicap. That is not the best version of Aljamain Sterling, and we can see better out of him. But what we also saw is that his cardio was going to be a concern, right? We knew that the cardio was going to be a concern. So I said he either needed to finish the fight or manage his cardio a lot better. He does too much because he's a little jittery on the feet. So Aljo does too much if he's forced to just stand the whole time. We saw against Pedro Munhoz, he threw a million shots, but he did gas himself in 15 minutes there because he threw everything, right? He just kept throwing, and he can only sustain that for 15 minutes. So we saw against Petr Yan, he was throwing in the first fight, and he was not going to have 25 minutes left to work with. He was just spending himself too quickly. So then what did we see? A championship level adjustment. This guy can get the back, put in the body triangle, and the body triangle is the new MMA meta, guys. If you're not aware, what do guys do to dominate grappling rounds? The one thing that the judges can't take away from you, right? It's like, I held him down for 3 minutes from his back, the most dominant position in fighting. You got to give me the rounds. Also, what did Aljo do to make sure that he created damage? Grab the wrists, elbows from on top. He tried to belly him out and throw elbows from ground and pound situations. That is how you utilize grappling situations to win fights. You dominate from the top position. I thought he could have qualified for 10-8 rounds early in that fight because of the myriad submission attempts, because of how much danger he was putting him in to finish the fight, and because he was landing serious ground and pound shots that was getting Jan's respect. However, it was not a one-way beatdown, right? It ended up being a very close fight. It ended up being a nip-tuck decision by the end, and Aljo had to just hold on to get the win. So close fight, plus 270 underdog comes through. I was very happy about it, but it was acknowledging it was a close fight. I did think Aljo deserved the win there. Let's be fair. I thought Aljo deserved the win, but I also saw that was a guy who had the skills to win. Petr Yan had the skills to win that fight, wasn't able to get the job done on the night. So then he goes on and fights Sugar Sean O'Malley, guys. He was a minus 250 favorite against the current champ, and he did go out there, and he just did not have quite enough on the night. I thought he deserved the nod on the night. I thought he deserved the nod when I watched that fight live. He took down O'Malley. He kept it very close. He did rock O'Malley at points. O'Malley rocked him back, cut him open, busted his face up. It was a hell of a fight. And the truth is, when I rewatched that fight, guys, I don't know that it was a robbery, right? On the night, I was pretty damn sure that it was a robbery, but I don't think it was. I think it was a very close fight that could have went either way in hindsight. And I think my own biases against O'Malley may have just clouded my judgment on the night. But I do think that Petr Yan showed in that fight that he could get cracked. He could get hurt, wobbled, rocked. He could get backed up a little bit. He can, people can create damage. People can mix him up in the grappling. And the other thing is, he likes to mix in the wrestling and the takedowns on people at times. But the fact that he wasn't able to dominate O'Malley in those spots was a little bit of a revelation to me. I would have thought that he would have been 10 levels above him in the wrestling and the grappling, and it just wasn't so. So when I think about that fight, right, That was a fight where I said to myself, man, is Petr Yan slipping a little bit? Let's go ahead and look at the intangibles here because Petr Yan is 31 years of age, guys, and his birthday was 3 weeks ago. So he's not old by any means. Even for this bantamweight division, there are other guys who are a little bit older than him, at the top of the division. So I don't think he's necessarily washed, let's say. However, the other thing that we do want to keep in the back of our mind is that people were, still ready to go back to the well, minus 250 against Merab Dvalishvili, right? And Merab at the time was on a massive win streak. The guy's doing everything right. And he's got great 25-minute cardio. He's got an ability to go out there and strike. He's got an ability to go out there and wrestle. And so I ended up taking plus 225 on Merab Dvalishvili against Petr Yan. I've bet against Petr Yan more often than anything, right? I've actually never bet on the guy. I bet Aljamain Sterling plus 270. I bet Corey Sandhagen plus 225. Or whatever the hell he was, I can't remember. And I bet Merab Dvalishvili plus 225. So he's a guy that I've made a lot of money fading Petr Yan. But I got to just say, it doesn't feel great trying to fade him, right? Like he's a guy that I do respect, but Merab Dvalishvili at plus 225, I'd take that against almost anybody in the world. It's just a guy that's too talented, too willing to go out there and push, a guy that's not going to quit on you, right? Like I say, that's the number one thing I'm looking for is a guy who's never going to say die. And Merab Dvalishvili said I would kill myself before I would lose to Petr Yan. I was like, at plus 225, that damn, we're going to find out, brother. And he went out there and showed he had the heart of a champion. He went out there and fought like a dog that night, and he walked Petr Yan down. He beat him up, and he got in his face all night. But I also do feel that we can't get it confused and say because he lost to Merab Dvalishvili, and by the way, he said that he was injured going into that fight with Merab. Did that look like the best version of Petr Yan I've ever seen? I'll just be truthful and say, no, it did not, right? I bet the plus 225. I cashed the money, but I also will say that looked like a guy who was not fully himself out there. And here's the other thing I want to mention, guys. We've now got 3 losses in a row for Petr Yan. It's not very often that a top guy, that a skilled fighter, that a guy who's a former champion, that a guy who's been competing right at this top level, that one of these guys just loses 4, 5, 6 fights in a row. Have we seen examples? Yeah, Renan Barão, right? We've seen examples even at bantamweight before, Marlon Moraes, guys that could just never get back on track. They lose the momentum. They lose that ability. They lose that confidence. Something goes wrong in the formula, and they just can't get it back right. But on the other side of things, right, we got to talk about both sides of this equation because we've got a very hungry, a very motivated Song Yadong. And I do think it's important to note, Song Yadong listed at 26 years of age. That is mere speculation, right? We don't want to get too caught up in that number because I truly think that Song Yadong is anywhere from 25 to 31. Like my guy is like anywhere along the spectrum. He's had a lot of fights. He's had a lot of professional bouts as well. And so when I'm thinking about how this guy presents, right, he's a great talent, right? He's very well-rounded. But we've also seen that Song Yadong has fought some of these common opponents and things haven't always gone as swimmingly. So let's talk about the Corey Sandhagen fight, for example. I thought that, we saw that Song Yadong had great moments against Corey Sandhagen. He had a lot of opportunities against Corey Sandhagen, landed his own hard shots, but he did absorb a lot of damage in that fight. And the cuts, the elbows, were able to stop the fight for Corey Sandhagen. Did have Corey by knockout that night, plus 450. And I thought we would do it the traditional way, but instead Corey had to get him with the doctor, right? He had to get those elbows slicing, and then the doctor was able to intervene on his behalf that night. We see typically Petr Yan doesn't mix in those elbows quite as much. He does like to mix in more of his knees, front kicks, as well as his boxing fundamentals. That's where he typically likes to get after it. Now, when you look at the other examples, right, Kyler Phillips was able to get one over on Song Yadong. That's his only other UFC loss, guys. Very impressive resume, very impressive strength of schedule as well. 10-2 overall in the promotion for Song Yadong. And this is a guy I've had my eye on for a while. I had said, I want to say it was 2 years ago, but if I'm wrong, don't kill me on that. I will retweet the tweet, though, where I had said Song Yadong's a guy who's on the come up. Song Yadong's a guy who's going to break into this top 15 at bantamweight. And here he is, right? He has arrived, no doubt about it. Guys can't deal with the athleticism. A lot of the time, they can't deal with the speed. They can't deal with the power. He's got a lot to bring to the table. And he's also a marketable guy. Song Yadong seems like he's fun, seems like he has a good time. He seems like he's got a great marketable style. And for Petr Yan, on the other side of things, I think maybe that's what's held him back a little bit in terms of his marketability. I'm not sure that people are really behind him. I think people kind of got the impression that he's a dick from the way that he handled the Anjos situation, truth be told. And then the fact that he hasn't been able to bounce back yet, that could lead to people, selling stock and being down on him. But then I do peek over at the Tapology, right? And he does seem like he's still getting love, right? I think more people are predicting that Petr Yan's going to get this job done than Song Yadong. So I think that this is an interesting spot because on the one hand, Song Yadong last time out against Gutierrez, he disappointed me, right? He did disappoint me. And the reason I say that is because I thought that he had an ability to go out there and submit him. I thought he had an ability to get, into those top dominant positions and find the finish. But instead, he was kind of content to ride out the 5 rounds there, to hold on to some positions from the top. And when I think about that, I say, I don't know that he's going to be able to take down Petr Yan. So it's probably going to turn into a competitive striking matchup. And what I think could be interesting here is if the fight starts to get extended and Song Yadong is wearing a lot of damage, because I don't know if Song Yadong has been in a lot of fights where guys are willing to sit in the pocket with him in exchange, and maybe we'll have a little bit cleaner boxing technique, skill for skill, because a lot of times Song Yadong, people don't want to stand in the pocket with him at all. They're afraid of the power. They're moving away, and they know that he's got a lot of sting and a lot of heat on his shots. Chris Point in the chat, shout out to Chris Sutton, says Song is massive as well. Big guy, strong guy, but he's also training at a Team Alpha Male. And I will say, I'm not sure the Team Alpha Male is like the number one place for developing these prospects and these athletes. I'm not sure that they're adding all that many tools to his resume, to his toolkit before these fights. And so he does have the great resume, he does have these great skills, but it's almost like a point where Petr Yan has typically been minus 250, minus 200, minus 300 against the top guys in the world, right? And on the other side of things, Song Yadong is like typically like a plus 100, minus 120, minus 155. He's typically a lot closer lined with his opponents. And so I think public perception is now changing drastically, right? Where it's like, this is a guy in Petr Yan who I believe still trains with Tiger Muay Thai. I'd have to double check that, but certainly he's a guy that's put in a lot of great work with some of the best fighters in the world. He is also quite a big star for the Russian market, 1.6 million followers here. So this is a spot where I think this could turn into a very competitive fight. And I just wouldn't be surprised if Petr Yan is able to get a close win here and get back on track, because at 31 years of age, I don't think he's completely washed. I don't think he's out to lunch. And I also believe that Merab Dvalishvili, what would he be lined against the Song Yadong? I'm not sure. So I do think this is a great fight and a competitive fight, but this is one of the first times I've ever thought, maybe there's betting value on Petr Yan. But I also have been a huge Song Yadong fan, so I don't want to hop off the train. I'm going to have to really think about this fight and be very cognizant. But here's the other thing. I don't believe that Petr Yan has ever closed an underdog in the UFC. So if this line flips outright, then I will definitely have to consider an underdog bet on Petr Yan here, because that would be a complete reversal of fortune. And he is on a losing streak, right? Eventually the market has to account for that. But I like to try and fade huge public perception swings. And if this becomes a spot where nobody is expecting Petr Yan to do anything, everybody's ready to write him off, I'll have to say, as a former champion, as a guy who's gone out there and lost to the very best fighters in the division, I don't want to, sell this guy down the river too early. So that's a spot where I think it's a great fight and a competitive fight. But right now I'm leaning towards a close decision in either direction. And I'll ever so slightly favor Petr Yan to get the job done, but certainly not a fight or a pick that I feel super bullish on. Next up, guys, holy shit. We're off the main card, but we're still talking about great fights. Unbelievable. We've got Curtis Blaydes taking on Jailton Almeida, and this is a hell of a matchup in the heavyweight division. Curtis Blaydes is a guy that has, just like Petr Yan, right? he's constantly getting the respect of the betting market. Like, this guy closed a favorite against Francis Ngannou. He gets knocked out. They run it back. He's a favorite again. They just love Curtis Blaydes no matter what. And I'll say this, though. Curtis Blaydes, most of the time, has earned his keep, right? He's earned his stripes. He does have a great record, 17-4 in professional MMA, 12-4 inside the UFC, with all 4 of those losses coming by way of knockout. And let's just call it how it is. Francis Ngannou, Derek Lewis, and Sergey Pavlovich, those are very heavy hitters. Those are guys that can knock out any man, woman, or child, right? You know that those guys, when they're throwing leather, can absolutely put any person to sleep. So Curtis Blaydes taking a couple naps in the heavyweight division, that's something that you got to understand, right? However, he's also been a guy that has, a speech problem, right? I don't know exactly what it is, but he has some stutter, and I don't mean to make fun or make light of that, but he's definitely a guy that I think has struggled with the marketability at times as a result of that, as a result of his attitude at times in the UFC, which hasn't always been positive, right? A lot of people find him to be a little bit jarring with his negativity at times. However, he's also a guy that seems pretty calm, reserved. The Mortal Kombat theme song, I'll just say, I've been to a Curtis Blaydes main event in person. The guy put Chris Dawkins in a body bag very quickly. Big knockout, looked like a fun, nice guy that night, right? And did everything right. So he's done a lot of good jobs for the company. He goes out there, fights guys, fights in main events, flies around the world, does have a win over the current heavyweight champion, Tom Aspinall. But if you guys watch that fight, you know as well as I do, one of the most anticlimactic heavyweight fights of all time. Tom Aspinall throws a low kick, bang, falls back over. That's the end of the fight. So Curtis Blaydes looked all right in that fight, but it was literally a 15-second contest. I don't think you could say much of anything about it. The Jairzinho Rozenstruik win for Curtis Blaydes, that's where it looks really sketchy, right? Like, Jairzinho looked very good over the weekend, was able to stuff the takedowns from Shamil Gaziev. We did see a guy in Curtis Blaydes able to go out there, take him down, right? He was able to go out there and get on top. But what we've also seen is a couple times where he got hurt, he got rocked, he got wobbled. That eye was starting to shut for Curtis Blaydes as well. So there's definitely been some, concerns on the Curtis Blaydes side. When we look at the Alexander Volkov fight, it's another fight where registers as a win, 25 minutes, went out there, grinded out a decision. But he was completely gassed by the end of that fight. He was hanging on for dear life. He did get hurt, rocked, and wobbled a few times in that fight with Volkov as well. So broadly speaking, good things from Curtis, but he's a guy that's been very start-stop in his career, right? We saw the Francis Ngannou fight didn't go his way. Then he gets back on track, and that was his first fight, by the way, right? He gets the eye injury. That's another example, by the way, where doctor stoppage could have happened against Jairzinho Rozenstruik. Doctor stoppage did happen against Ngannou in his UFC debut. Then he goes out there, gets the win over Cody East, Daniel Omalanchik, Alexei Olenek, Mark Hunt, Alistair Overeem, all supremely winnable fights. None of those guys particularly talented wrestlers or grapplers either. Then he rematches Francis, finished in the first round, finished via knockout once again. Then he gets the win over Justin Willis, the win over Shamil Abdurakhimov, the win over a very past his prime Junior Dos Santos, and the win I just mentioned over Volkov. Then he gets knocked out by Derek Lewis. And the thing that was concerning in that fight with Derek Lewis was the fact that he did not pursue wrestling or grappling until it was over, right? And what we also saw is that he had a general discomfort with the fight when it was being contested at striking distance, right? We saw that Curtis can deliver big, powerful shots. He can knock people out. He's done that against other guys. But when we've seen a lot of these ability to get, Curtis Blaydes into striking exchanges, he starts to get uncomfortable. He starts to reach for his shots, and he doesn't always pull the trigger. And so then he started to basically telegraph his takedowns. And when we saw the telegraph takedowns, our guy Derek Lewis was standing there waiting and just bus driver uppercut like his name was Marge Simpson, and absolutely sent him into the the shadow realm, right? And the thing is, guys, if you want to be nervous about this sport for a couple days, go listen to how he sounded after that Derek Lewis knockout, guys. It is actually harrowing. It is truly like stuff that you don't want to like. it'll like haunt your nightmares, right? He's like, he's just like groaning for minutes and minutes at a time, right? Very serious. And that's the kind of thing where I didn't like that knockout. I think long-term that could be a scary knockout for his health, for his future. So then you look at the fact that he was able to get back on track, had a couple big wins, but then Sergey Pavlovich dealt him a very similar fate. So I will shout out to our guy, Chris. Chris says, let's go. I got Jailton Almeida this week. Good luck, lads. Thank you for the dono, Chris. Thank you for the shout as well, because my man is looking for Jailton to get the win here. So as we round out our Curtis Blaydes discussion, what I want to say is, who is the best grappler that Curtis Blaydes has fought in the UFC? I would say Volkov is a black belt. Dawkins, I believe, is a black belt. Aspinall, again, can't really count that fight, but he is a guy who's competitive on the ground. But like a lot of these guys, they're typical heavyweights, right? They don't have any real grappling, wrestling to speak of, right? That's just the way the heavyweight division is. That's why Curtis is typically such a big favorite. He is the better wrestler. He is the better grappler in almost every fight that he's been in the UFC. That's what makes this compelling matchmaking, because on this side, Jailton Almeida is a different kind of character, right? He's a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt who's very talented with his skill on the ground. He's very talented with that black belt. He has an ability to close the show with the rear naked choke at a very high rate for this heavyweight division. That's what we've seen him leverage over his opponents. But let's also talk about this guy, Jailton Almeida's run, because he is a Contender Series product. He is a guy that is now 6-0 inside of the big show, but it's not like he's never lost before. He has dropped fights on the regional scene, even to Bruno Assis, who people may know lost a decision to him back in the day. Thiago Moreira was able to knock him out back in 2017. So we have seen Jailton Almeida can be cracked. He can be gotten to. Shout out to Devin Davis in the chat. Says, love your positivity and the thorough breakdowns of each and every fight. A lot of fun fights this weekend. Let's enjoy it. Thank you so much for the dono, brother. It's always my pleasure. And we're here doing this each and every week for all the UFC cards, twice a week for the first look early on. And then we come back on Thursday to break the whole thing down with a sharp guest as well. So hope that you'll join us for that. But thank you so much for the kind words and the support, my brother. Now, back to this fight, guys. What we've got on tap is Jailton Almeida, who arrived in style, right? He got to the UFC by taking on Nasruddin Nasruddinov. He was a plus 185 underdog that night. 17% of voters on Tapology were expecting him to get it done. And I was one of them, baby, because I had Jailton Almeida plus 185 that night. I had Jailton Almeida by submission, and he sent the Dagestani home, right? My man was able, I'm kidding, right? Nasruddinov's from Moscow. That'll tell you everything you need to know. But what we saw is that this guy, Jailton Almeida, went out there and got the dominant win, the dominant finish. That was back in the light heavyweight division, guys. This is a guy that came in. He was a light heavyweight. He was a little bit smaller, right? But now what we've seen is he's been growing into that body. He's been using all the right supplements, right? My man's been lifting weights and doing all this stuff. So we saw him go out there, get his first win in the UFC against Nasruddin Nasruddinov. Then he beats Danilo Marquez. That's also in the light heavyweight division. But what we saw is the Parker Porter fight, right? Moves up to heavyweight, gets the win there. 220-pound catchweight with Turkali. Dominates him, takes him to the ground. Shamil Abdurakhimov, he went out there, lifted up big-ass Shamil, turned him sideways, slammed him to the ground. Did a great job. What we've seen is a lot of good showings from Jailton Almeida. The Jairzinho Rosenstrike fight, another showing where he went out there, missed on that first takedown attempt, got the second one, was able to get it to the ground. The thing that I haven't loved from Almeida at times, if I had to make a point of criticism, right, when you're talking about a guy who's 6-0 in the UFC, you got to nitpick a little bit. You got to be a little bit critical. And so the things I haven't loved, the wrestling from his knees, right? Jailton's so strong and he's so much more powerful than most of his opponents that he just fires his way onto two knees and then grabs a hold of their legs and barrels them over, right? And I do think that we've seen a guy like Curtis Blaydes have, no real resistance most of the time when he goes for his takedowns. He's strong, he's physical, he's got good foundational takedowns, right? I think he could potentially take down Jailton Almeida. But the question you'd have to ask yourself is, does he want to take down Jailton Almeida? Because Jailton is actually dangerous from multiple positions. Do we know how dangerous Curtis can be with his ground and pound from on top? Yes, we do. But have we ever seen him utilize a submission threat, a submission game? No, we have not. On the other side of things, we've seen Jailton Almeida show a multivariate approach from the top position. What do I mean by that? I mean that we've seen Jailton Almeida sit in the mount and just throw a hammer fist like he's got a new dance craze, right? My man's just out there slamming these hammer fists home on the guard of other people. But then we've also seen he'll sit there for 25 minutes if he thinks it's more beneficial and lay on top of Derek Lewis and not let him breathe, right? Make sure it's just takedown, mitigate the risk. Not a bad idea. So when I'm thinking about this matchup, when I'm thinking about these two guys squaring off, let's talk about it from a number of different levels. We've got the techniques, right? I think that whoever's able to get on top here should be able to set the table for themselves. The reason I say that is because if you want to get, your jiu-jitsu game going in the heavyweight division, the light heavyweight division, you do not want to be underneath somebody. It's not to say that Jailton couldn't be created from there, couldn't create some explosions, some opportunities from there, but it is to say you just don't want to be underneath another large man because you will get tired at a more quick rate based on gravity. Just like logically, you don't want to be underneath somebody. That's where Curtis could create some damage as well. Now, for Jailton, he's going to try and get on top. He's going to try and use his striking fundamentals. He's not a very, strong striker. That's not his bread and butter, but he does have an ability to mix up his kicks. What I've seen from him is at times he'll go out there and try and low kick his opponents, try and get them off balance, try and get them, not as sturdy on their stance. And then he'll try and go for the takedown. Or conversely, he'll try and throw those front kicks right up the middle. And the reason he's doing that is to try and create space at the hips to create a lower level shot where he can wrap up the two legs and take you to the ground. So I think that from a, top position vulnerability standpoint, I think that the better guy on top position is Jailton Almeida. I think he can pass the guard at a higher rate. And I also think he can work to more dominant positions. For me, the X factor that I'm going to be looking for on tape this week is the examples of Curtis getting taken down in the past and how he looked off of his back. I don't believe that he's on the same level in terms of his Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So then my question becomes, can Jailton get this to the ground? I think that if Jailton can get it to the ground, can get on top, he should be able to get into dominant positions. But I just want to make sure that my tape study shows me enough examples of Curtis Blaydes falling apart in his footwork or in his wrestling sequencing defensively, because I just can't remember much of it off the top of my head. Like I said, most of the time you're seeing Curtis in these dominant wrestling situations against guys that have no chance to deal with him physically. I think that in terms of momentum, in terms of the business interest, in terms of the marketability, I think Jailton Almeida is the side that the UFC would love to see move forward. I think they like this kid. I think they want to see big things for him. And I think the market likes Curtis Blaydes a little bit more than the UFC likes Curtis Blaydes. So for me, I'm leaning towards Jailton Almeida to get the win here, but I want to do my research and my due diligence because I do think this is a hard fight to call. And we've also seen substantial line movement. This was a minus 200 on Jailton Almeida that has been coming down, down, down. And now it has flipped to Curtis Blaydes being the favorite. But I already said Curtis Blaydes has been favored in just about every fight he's ever been in the UFC. So that does not surprise me. Next up, guys, let's move to another fight on the card here. We've got Katlyn Cerminara, otherwise known as Katlyn Chookagain, taking on Maycee Barber. And Maycee, the future Barber, is back in the building. Last time out, she was able to cash us a nice underdog ticket against Amanda Ribas, right? Another one of my favorite fighters. But how many times do I have to tell you guys I like Amanda Ribas way better at 115 than I do at 125? She's just a little bit undersized for that division, right? And so Maycee Barber, strong, physical, can go out there and set the tone with her striking, with her damaging shots, especially from the clinch, right? Maycee Barber, sometimes she gets into a little bit of that, striking from the outside, a little bit too far away. Same thing that Katlyn Chookagain does a lot of, right? They both like to posture off, kind of be at distance, throw their shots from too far away. And I just think that the difference is, number one, you've got a much hungrier girl, I feel, in Maycee Barber. What I mean by that is she's young, she's closer to her physical prime, and I believe that she's still hungry to get into those title shots, those big opportunities. On the other side, Katlyn Chookagain has been there. She's been in a lot of these big fights, these big opportunities. But what have we seen? Constantly falling short in those big fights, in those big opportunities. We've seen her in the number one contender type fights more recently, starting to fall off a little bit. So what I'm thinking about in this fight is a girl in Katlyn Chookagain who is a Renzo Gracie, talented practitioner, right? The one thing that I'll say is like a credit to her is that she could potentially mix in some back takes in this fight. Maycee Barber at times, if you could criticize where she's made mistakes, she's given up her back. She's put herself in tough positions to win decisions based on optics, giving bad positions to women, making close fights on the cards. When I think about how Katlyn Chookagain has struggled at times, it's the physical opponents that she takes on. It's the people that can really hit her and hurt her as well. You think of a Manon Fiorot, powerful, physical woman. You think of a Jessica Andrade, right? Little muscle house with power in her hands, was able to rip to the body, do a lot of damage. I mean, Katlyn Chookagain basically hit like a 360 after getting punched in the body by Jessica Andrade. I hated her reactions to getting hit. It seems like powerful punchers, they're just not very frequent in MMA. So when you see Katlyn Chookagain against most of these women, she's able to go out there and compete and deal with those shots. But I do have my doubts and my suspicions about whether she's going to be able to take the power coming her way from Maycee Barber on Saturday night, because Maycee Barber is a girl that has had moments where she's been, getting backed up, getting hit with her with shots, and then she responds to that adversity and finds the finish, right? JJ Aldrich, early on in her UFC career, landing big shots, feeling good in round one. And then Maycee just started turning it up on her, turned up the pressure, got in her face, beat her up to the body, beat her up to the head, and she didn't want it anymore. And I do worry that when you've got a girl like Katlyn Chookagain, who is now changing her name and maybe looking to build a family, maybe looking to move on a little bit in life, she's 35 years of age, 25 for Maycee Barber. So she does have more experience. She's been around a little bit longer. She's got a little bit of that vet savvy, a little bit more seasoned on the ground, going to have a length, height, and reach advantage in this spot. But I just think that Maycee should be able to hurt her, do more damage, deal bigger, impactful blows when she gets into the clinch here. So if Katlyn is able to dance around her, keep her game going, though. Did you know Barber never scored a knockdown in the UFC? Yeah, I did. Like I said, it's mostly clinch work. It's mostly beating people up from the grounded positions where she's able to get her finishes. Also, people do tend to quit on the fence against Maycee, right? Like she'll back people up to the fence. They don't have anywhere to go. Then she just starts unloading big shots on them. That's typically how she gets the show closed. But frankly, landing knockdowns in WMMA is just rare, period. So I won't hold that too much against her. She does get women out of there and make them quit, which is what matters to me. But for sure, this is where it becomes interesting, right? A lot of people are expecting this fight to go the distance. I think that Maycee Barber is going to hold a lot of the finishing equity here, but I also think if you're looking at a decision-only market, I wouldn't hate a play on Katlyn Chookagain. If you're looking for that value, that upside, I just would be kind of stunned if she was able to finish somebody like Maycee Barber. I don't see Katlyn having those dynamic finishing abilities. I don't see Maycee quitting on herself like that either. So those are my thoughts on this fight overall. I also just wanted to point out Maycee Barber, another alpha male fighter, as Mbe says, but she actually trains in a bunch of different places. She's cross-trained a lot of different spots. I think she used to get work wrestling with Ben Askren. Like she's kind of just been all over doing different bits and bobs in her career to try and get better. And I think at 25 years of age, that's not something that I hold against her. I actually prefer if she gets access to more coaches, more information, and not just stays at the one gym, because you can get caught into a little bit of a rut doing that. So for me, Maycee Barber is going to be the pick here, but I'm not extremely bullish on the fight. I'd want to make sure I do my due diligence before I get caught, back in Barber. And she is at a little bit of a size disadvantage here. Next up, guys, we got actually, there is one last note I wanted to give on that fight. The one last note is I saw Katlyn Chookagain post something like, Gordon Ryan gave me his supplement stack, which that sounds like she's on crazy steroids. Shout out to USADA dipping out. If that's true, I'd be curious to know exactly what she's doing in her supplement stack, right? I'll look a little deeper to see if she's on all the juice here, but I know that Gordon is somebody that would have access to the right things, right? Shout out to that. Shout out to Spaffron says, hit the likes, motherfuckers. We'd appreciate the support. If you guys could drop a like on the video as we keep it rolling here. Appreciate each and everybody who's still rocking with us. We got a great lightweight fight up next. Mateusz, the gamer, Gamrot, is taking on Rafael dos Anjos, and everybody's expecting Gamrot to run through RDA. This is becoming a pretty substantial line in terms of the Mateusz Gamrot side. And, you know, Gamrot's a funny guy, right? Because I've been on the Gamrot side a number of times at plus money in the UFC. One of the most brutal beats. You talk about bad beats, guys. I had Mateusz Gamrot by sub 2 against what's his name? Carlos Diego Pereira, right? And he hits him with a knee to the body that causes his rib to break. Then he locks in the rear naked choke. And as he locks in the rear naked choke, Diego Pereira explains that his rib is broken to the referee, and they stop the fight for a TKO. Unbelievable. Gamrot was about to submit his ass, but I think that in that spot, right, that was a great showing from Gamrot. That was one of his better showings in the UFC. Brutal shots to the body, uses that pace, uses that wrestling ability. I've always been a huge fan of Mateusz Gamrot because his style is awesome, right? He goes out there, he'll attempt 50 takedowns. He doesn't care. He likes to wrestle, grapple, mix it up. He can scramble. He can roll. He can be wild. But sometimes maybe the fundamental offense is just a little bit lacking, right? Like you don't always see a lot of jabs and straights, right? You don't see a lot of 1-2s. You don't see all that many, basic kicks. Sometimes he just mixes it up a little too much, right? He's throwing a little bit too much pizzazz, a little bit too much control style grappling positions, but he's not going out there and damaging his opponent enough as he maybe should be. We've seen other opportunities, other big letdown spots from Gamrot as well, right? Minus 300 against Guram Kutateladze. Everything went sideways there, right? And if you guys listen to the American Top Team contingency, they will tell you he was dead sick before that fight, injured. He should not have taken the fight, but he took the fight. He lost the fight, and that was the way that it went, right? You look at this guy, RDA. RDA deserves a lot of respect. He deserves a lot of credit, because what he typically does is says yes to these brutal assignments, and he goes out there and competes, right? You look at RDA last time out, loses to Vicente Luque. Vicente Luque, big guy at 170, right? He's not a small man for 170 pounds, and people were thinking to themselves, that Vicente Luque's career was over because he got knocked out brutally by Jeff Neal. His brain was bleeding in that fight. But that was a spot where southpaws just give problems to Vicente Luque. You look at Vicente Luque, and I'm talking about purely on the feet. They give him problems, right? You look at the fight that he had with Bilal Muhammad. He's one of the guys that knocked Bilal Muhammad, right? Hit him clean, knocked him dead. And then Bilal Muhammad fought him from southpaw, and he made him look like an amateur, right? He just danced around him for the full 5 rounds. So I think that we've seen Vicente Luque sometimes can just be a little bit one note on the feet. Like you could figure him out if you switch stances. Same thing that Wonderboy did to him, right? So I think that we've seen RDA suboptimal competing for him at 170, right? He's a big guy for 155. He's an older guy for 155. He doesn't want to keep cutting weight every time out. So he moves back and forth, right? But a 21-13 record inside the octagon. And most of the time, he's saying yes to brutal fight after brutal fight. Brian Barberena, that was a free win. That's what we call a get back on track for a guy like RDA. He had too much wrestling, too much grappling, too much skill, way better level. So he was able to go out there and get the win. The Fiziev fight, guys, I was on Fiziev. I was on Fiziev ITD. Fiziev got the win. He earned it, knocked him out. That was a brutal fight. That was a hard fight. That was a back and forth fight. And Fiziev had to keep in for 5 rounds. He had to keep fighting. Very smart, very diligent, going to the body, mixing it up. He was able to finally close the show on a very tough competitor. But we've seen that Fiziev, very talented guy in his own right, a guy who's competing with a lot of the top-level guys. I thought he could have gotten the win over Justin Gaethje. Very close fight. I thought he could have gotten the nod that night. So you look at that, and then you say to yourself, okay, Renato Moicano, another guy who's a top guy who can grapple, who can move around, who can do well. He's a young guy. He took that fight on short notice. I had a bet on RDA. 7.5 units on RDA minus 150. Y'all must have forgot this night, right? He beat the brakes off of Renato Moicano. And the truth is, I thought that he showed mercy to Moicano late in that fight. Like, if you watch round 4 and stuff, This guy Moicano's like bleeding everywhere, coming out for the round. And I was just like, this guy RDA does not want to hit him no more. He does not want to do no more damage to this guy, to the point where he started to let Moicano back into the fight. So I was like, holy shit, this guy, he can fight still to this day. He can still go out there and put on a scrap. And I'm still willing to part ways with my money on an RDA bet when the time and the situation is right, because he is a guy that will go out there and fight hard. He got the win via split decision over Paul Felder on short notice. That one, I don't really know what to make of that. The Michael Chiesa one, he's fighting a bigger grappler up at 170. That's a tough sell for him as well. He doesn't have a great dart stroke, right? That's the way you beat Michael Chiesa, especially in a grappling match. Leon Edwards, another guy, he's the world champion, right? He loses to the world champion. Okay, no skin off your nose there, my brother. That was back in 2019. Kevin Lee, arm triangle choke victory. Impressive win. That was a good showing from him. And we saw, guys, the Colby Covington fight says lost via unanimous decision. I encourage you guys to go back and watch that. That fight is so much more competitive than people remember it being. I scored that fight 48-47 for Colby Covington. That was a very, very close fight. RDA kept it close with him in the wrestling and kept it close with him in the grappling. Okay, so he was not by any means a pushover. Okay, and when I think about what RDA looks like right now, guys, this guy looks like he is sauced to the gills. Could I be wrong? Yes. Am I normally wrong about these things? I don't think so, right? Like when I'm talking about post-USADA, this guy does look to me like a guy who maybe got back onto some supplementation and is ready to rumble a little bit. So is he past his sell-by date? Yes, he is. Is he a little bit old for the division? Yes, he is. But now let's talk about his opponent here, because Mateusz Gamrot, a guy that I really like and respect, is 33 years of age. He's no young man. He's not a spring chicken. He's another guy who's like, approaching middle age in this lightweight division, right? A lot of these guys at lightweight, 33 to 35 right now, right? That's kind of just where they're at. And those guys will age out. But we had said the Gamrots, the people they're going to check in, now they're kind of just like right there themselves, where they're going to start aging out at their own pace, at their own rate. And Gamrot's had a lot of fights, right? 23-2, great professional record, excellent job. And he's a guy that's been on the precipice of these title shots and these big fights and these big opportunities. But now let's look with a little bit of a fine-tooth comb, right? Beneil Dariush is a little bit older, right? He hasn't been having that same success recently in the division. He's kind of fallen off since he got that Charles Oliveira fight, got knocked out brutally his next two. And what did we see against Gamrot? Who got closer to knocking out whom? Beneil Dariush almost put this guy in an ambulance, right? He hit him with a left hand so hard it shook the earth. It was like, boing! And like this guy Gamrot, I couldn't believe that he got back up. He's a tough son of a bitch. But when you look like Gamrot walked into big shots in that fight with no defense. So I think that Gamrot sometimes a little bit too loosey-goosey, like this is his movement, right? It's all hands kind of at shoulder level and the head's going all over the place, but he gets hit sometimes. And I do think that a guy like RDA has an ability to land shots. He does have an ability to find his own offense, and he's not a complete pushover in the wrestling and the grappling. I don't think he's going to get dominated by Gamrot in the wrestling and the grappling. So I'm not saying that I'm going to be playing RDA, trying to convince us to play a 40-year-old lightweight. This guy says to me, brother, last week I tried to convince you to play a 36-year-old Ayman Zahabi, and what did he do? He beat up the 28-year-old because he's better at fighting. Okay, so we got to understand something here. This isn't just I'm going to go out there and tell you guys, go lay the minus 450 on everything, right? That's not me. And if that's what you want, wrong place, brother. I'll always tell you how I feel. And how I feel is that Mateusz Gamrot at plus money has been a fantastic bet throughout his career. I bet him a lot of times. But this is now a spot where it's banana peel territory. It's a potential for him to go out there and underperform in this spot, right? And RDA, he has fans in the UFC, right? People know this guy. He's a former lightweight champion. And he's gone out there and done a lot of hard jobs for the company, which is why they keep giving him shots and opportunities. And this is not an easy fight by any means. Could he get knocked out? Yes, he can. But do I see Gamrot being a guy who's super lethal with the hands? No. Like I just see him being a little bit more of a all-arounder. He likes to mix it up in all phases. And if you want to mix it up with RDA, he can hit a switch. He can wrestle, he can grapple, And we've seen him do it for 25 minutes how many times? So if you want to pretend he can't do it for 15 minutes, I don't know about all that, right? Like, is Gamrot out there separating himself every fight in 15 minutes? No, he's not. That's the long and short of it. So I think Gamrot, great fighter, serious threat. But if he was minus 250, we're having a different conversation maybe. Minus 450, we're saying over 80% of the time he's getting this done. How? Where? That's when you have to start asking yourself those harder questions. And I do think I could see a lot more worlds in which this is a close competitive decision where Gamrot gets the win, but not a lot of times where he's dominating, embarrassing RDA, blowing him out of the water. I don't see a lot of that in my vision of this fight. So for me, that's what I'd want to see from a minus 450. That's what I'd want to see from a guy, I'd want to know that the resistance isn't going to be there. And I don't think RDA is ready to throw it in, right? If I thought he was going to throw it in and retire, I'd say, hey, all respect. But the thing is, I'm seeing a guy who is talking shit about current fighters, who says, I want to get in there with Paddy Pimblett. He's the most overrated guy on the roster. I'm seeing a guy who's still talking shit and doing his thing, and it looks like he's on steroids. So I'm like, maybe he still wants to fight. Like, I don't know what else RDA wants to do with this. Like, my man's just all in. So for me, I'm not ready to write him off and say, like, yeah, this guy that's fought a million guys and he's fought all the toughest guys is just going to go in there and phone it in. I think he's going to go give an honest fight. And unless he gets knocked out brutally, I think he's probably going to keep it somewhat competitive. So I don't know. I haven't decided if I'm going to bet it yet or what I'm going to do with it. I think it's a compelling fight. And I have to look at the market as well. But, I just can't be laying minus 450, minus 500 with a guy like Gamrot, despite how good he is, despite how talented he is. He hasn't shown me that proof of concept that I would need. And I've seen examples in the past where, whether it's an injury, whether it's undisclosed, my man still went out there, competed and lost. And by the way, if you were on him that night, there was no apology letter. There was no, hey, I'll send you the money in the mail, right? It's like, you're just out the money. So that's the way it is, right? And you got to have a very high degree of confidence to lay minus 450 in mixed martial arts. That's all I'm saying. Next up, guys, we got Pedro Munhoz, the young Punisher, the ironically named young Punisher at 37 years of age, taking on Kyler Phillips, the Matrix, on the other side here. So I think that this is a really interesting spot because Kyler Phillips, guy that doesn't compete quite as much as I'd like to see. Last time out, got the win via unanimous decision over Hani Barcelos. But the time before that, cashed me a nice ticket against Marcelo Rojo via submission in that spot. Kyler Phillips is a guy that I think typically starts hot and slows down a little bit over the course of his fights, right? I had back in the day, Raulian Paiva, majority decision. I had my guy Raulian Paiva in that spot. So this is a guy that I've looked to get on the other side of Kyler Phillips in the past because I felt like he slows down at times. But if you guys watch that back, a little bit lucky that they didn't stop that fight in round one. Raulian Paiva was getting blasted. He was getting hurt. He was getting, landed on. And now they had last time out, Pedro go out there and, fight Chito Vera, right? This is a guy that is losing more and more as his career goes on. But I had tweeted this before, and I truly believe this. Pedro Munhoz might have the best chin in the history of bantamweight mixed martial arts because he's fought murderer's row of power punchers, explosive guys, legends, champions, all these things. The guy doesn't get put away, right? He goes out there and fights these killers, and he just finds a way to stay in the fight for the full 15 minutes no matter what. And he's even found ways to put guys away in the UFC. Cody Garbrandt, former champion, knocked him out in the first round brutally. Rob Font hurt him so bad that Rob Font turned into a wrestler, started shooting takedowns from a mile away, put him in the guillotine. This guy has one of the best guillotine chokes you will see in mixed martial arts for sure. He has a fantastic guillotine. And one of the things you'll notice is his ability to get to the mount with the guillotine, his ability to rotate the hips. He's got strong hips. He's got a low center of gravity. He's a small guy. And I can just tell you guys, I'm not very big myself, but I have a very strong guillotine. I have short arms. When you can lock the guillotine and your arms aren't very long, you can create a lack of space quickly. And that's what you see from Pedro Munhoz. He does fundamentally right everything on that guillotine choke. So Kyler Phillips, who is a good grappler and a good wrestler and a guy who can mix in multiple phases, in my humble opinion, should stay as far away as he is physically able to from Pedro Munhoz, because that's Pedro's best chance to win the fight, in my view, is if Kyler gets hurt, if Kyler makes a mistake, if he goes for that shot, because the other thing is this is becoming an IQ test in certain ways against Pedro Munhoz. He likes very limited skills. He's got that great guillotine. He's got a very hard low kick, and he's got an ability to mix in his power hooks from the outside. But we've seen guys like Jose Aldo, right? The tail end of his career, on the way out, he was able to box circles around Pedro Munhoz, right? He just continuously stepped to the side, jab, jab, used his leverage, used his footwork, used his speed and his ability. And by the end of the fight, you know, Pedro just said, like, legend, I still have so much to learn from you. That was how it was, right? Like, you just see that Pedro is not quite on the same level, on the same tier as some of these very upper echelon guys. He just can't quite get over that hump. His skills are a little bit too basic. They're a little bit too predictable. So he can compete. He can keep it close. He can fight hard. But that last time out against Chito Vera, it's another example of Chito getting the nod, not by being that much better than Pedro, by outworking Pedro, by doing more. How about Aljamain Sterling, right? Is Aljamain Sterling known for his striking output typically? No, right? We mentioned before, he overdid it against Petr Yan that first time out, almost gassed himself out, was lucky to get the DQ win. But then he was able to dance circles around Pedro Munhoz. Guys, it's one of the most impressive showings from Aljo in his entire career. He went out there and volume this guy from the beginning to the end, right? Just never let him have a chance. Low kicks, middle kicks, high kicks, punches. Aljo just never stopped throwing, and Pedro became very reactive. I think Kyler Phillips in this fight needs to use his speed, needs to use his footwork, needs to use his youth, needs to use his momentum. He should be able to bounce around on the outside with this guy. He should be able to land his shots. And as long as he doesn't get into extended exchanges, make a mistake with the grappling, I think he should be able to get the win in this fight. But it should be close, right? I don't expect it's going to be a dominant, runaway performance. Pedro Munhoz is no pushover. He's not a hoe. He's going to go out there and fight. But I just don't know that he's got enough layers. I don't know that he's got enough switch-ups in his game. And Kyler Phillips, still young enough, still improving, fought tough guys in the UFC, out of the UFC. He's put together a solid resume. I think this is the right step up and the right time for him to make a step forward in his career. So should be a good scrap, but we'll have to find out. This is a interesting fight. All righty. Next up, guys, we've got Michel Pereira taking on Michal Oleksiejczuk. And if you guys remember, Michel Pereira had a little bit of that controversy, right? He's supposed to fight Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, misses weight for that showing. That cost him his welterweight standing. Right now, he moves up to 185 pounds to take on Andre Petroski and gets the easy win there, just dominated Petroski. Petroski looked like he didn't want to be in there with him. So now we're looking at a Michal Oleksiejczuk, Lord Michal. And Lord Michal is a fun guy to watch fight. You know, like if you guys have not been watching the UFC for a long time, then you haven't seen this guy up at 205 pounds looking like he's, a junior version of the guy he's about to fight, right? It looks like he's half his size. And he just run into the pocket, throwing wild shots, trying to take people out with hammers of punches and just going crazy. And I like Oleksiejczuk, right? He's responded to me on Twitter before. We've had some conversation in half of Polish, right? My man is out there. He likes fight fans. He likes getting after it. But he also has had a limited game at times, right? He's working with Anjos MMA over in Poland. Some of those guys, I think Muradov and these guys, they're trying to get better. They're trying to improve on that ground game, trying to improve on that wrestling and that foundational skills, because at 185, he has the punching power. He's got the ability to box with these guys and keep it pretty competitive and honest, right? If we look at the recent run of performances, he's been a little bit up and down, but we've seen Chidi and Njokuani was able to go out there and get the win. Caio Barajo dealt him from the bottom of the deck there at 185, right? Really tough one. Cody Brundage got the win, got the knockout there. Sam Alvey, kind of a free win. Again, got the knockout in round one. And then a loss to Dustin Jacoby that was back up at 205 pounds. So if you look at this guy, had wins over Shamil Gamzatov, knocked him out at 205 pounds. Beat Modestas Mikauskis, still signed to the UFC, recently re-signed to the UFC. He beat him via close decision in that fight as well. I thought that could have went either way, but truthfully, another nice win at 205 pounds. He had losses to Jim Crute and Open St. Preux. So you've seen he could tire out, he could get defeated in some of those spots. But when we've seen him move down to 185, the only loss so far is a very reasonable one to Caio Borrajo. So in this fight, Michel Pereira is a guy that has fought at 170 pounds for most of his UFC career, and last time out got the win at 185. I don't know how he's going to translate as a 185-pound competitor. Maybe it's going to be better for him because he's not going to have to cut as much weight and he's not going to lose as much stamina, because we've seen this is a guy that gasses out at times in the past, right? We've seen Michel Pereira gas out against Tristan Connolly, who is a featherweight in the UFC, like a guy who competed at 145. He completely gassed out in that fight. That was a long time ago, though, right? And we haven't seen as much of that recently. We've seen a nice win streak now from Michel Demoledor Pereira. He's on a 6-fight win streak heading into this contest, but his only win at 185 in the UFC is over Andre Petroski. And Andre Petroski, while a very talented wrestler and grappler, he does not necessarily have the same striking defense, right? And we haven't seen him tested on the feet very much in the UFC, but we do know based on that fight alone, definitely a work in progress, definitely a lot that could still be improved upon there. And a lot of questions will be answered about his grappling in his next fight against Jacob Malkoun. But what we have in this spot is a guy in Pereira who's had a lot of, opponents pull out of the fights recently. So he hasn't been able to keep up that same level of activity. And on top of that, he's a guy that's a little bit wild and reckless sometimes, both with his walkouts, with his energy level, and also with his offense. We've seen at times against Nico Price, he goes for like a spinning backflip head kick. And frankly, he should have been disqualified. He landed a backflip onto his opponent's head, which is a foul, right? It's just like the referee wasn't paying attention or something. But that's the kind of thing that makes me uncomfortable backing somebody at chalk, is boneheaded decisions, a little bit of inconsistency with the weight class, not making weight, blowing big, important opportunities, right? He was about to fight Wonder Boy, could have been ranked in the welterweight division, could have been 1 or 2 fights away from a title. And instead now he's building his resume at 185 pounds and doing all this crazy stuff. So I think that for me, Michel Pereira does have, some upside still. He's still a fun guy. He still goes out there. He's marketable. He's got a big social media following, but I also could just see him getting hurt, making a mistake, gassing out and losing a fight as well. Shout out to Mbe. He almost got 10-8'd by Nico Price. I agree. Like Nico Price, was able to land big shots on him and find a way to survive in that fight. And we've seen Nico Price has looked like an absolute shell of himself in virtually every fight since then. So I just can't trust a guy who's been disqualified against Diego Sanchez, who's been defeated by Tristan Connolly, KO'd by Dusko Todorovic at 185 before he came to the UFC as well. So this is a guy who I just can't trust him at 185 right now at chalk prices. I'd be interested to see if he's able to build some momentum at 185. But again, talk about guys that are going to go out there and try and fight for your money. I don't think Oleksiejczyk's going to quit on himself here. I think he's going to go out there and try and throw, get in the pocket, brawl with this guy, hurt him, try and land big shots. And I think he could do some damage here. The thing is, if I was to look for a contrarian prop, if I was to try and get for a value bet, maybe on the Pereira side, I'd be looking at Pereira via submission in this fight, because I do think Oleksiejczyk, just a liability on the ground. Pereira, pretty big, long, weirdly limb length for this guy is probably there to latch on a submission if he's able to hurt him, if he's able to get him into some dicey situations. So shout out to Blomdog, says, hey Liam, Michel Pereira getting beat up. I'm calling Michal KO 2-3 on that Polish power. Shout out to you, brother. I'm wishing you the best of luck. And shout out to my guy, the numbers, Mason. He cares more about entertaining than winning. Sounds like Kevin Holland. Oh my God, that's so funny. Similar to Holland in that regard. You're my brother for that, because we were thinking on the exact same wavelength. But when I'm looking for a guy, I want a guy who's serious about fighting and not just about the entertainment, right? Because at the end of the day, I'm about winning my bets, right? I'm not just trying to throw up money and hope for the best. So I'm looking for guys that are going to go out there and fight hard for my money, that are serious about their career, serious about moving forward, serious about getting wins. I'm not looking for these guys that are out there to entertain and dance around and have fun. That's all great from a fan, from a spectator standpoint, but not from an investment standpoint. Next up, guys, we got Felipe Lins taking on Ion Cutelaba at 205 pounds. And Felipe Lins, I've been betting on him as an underdog in the UFC. I've enjoyed having those opportunities at times. I don't know what to do with this matchup, right? Because on the one hand, Ion Cutelaba is like the ultimate madman. He comes out there with different game plans for different fights. Sometimes he's looking to brawl. He's looking to throw big shots. He's got some power. Sometimes he's looking to get the takedown and beat somebody up on the ground. Sometimes he's looking to go for that submission. Sometimes he's just shooting himself into a hole. He's getting tired. I don't know how to get a great read on Ion Cutelaba. He seems like one of the most volatile fighters in this light heavyweight division. And he also does seem like a guy who could still put it all together. He's young, right? He's not an old man, and he does have a lot of high-level experience, but he seems like such a head case. He seems like such a guy who has a difficult time controlling himself. And in a fighting discipline, you got to be the master of yourself first. This guy seems like he's just all over the place, and I don't trust guys like that when they're out there. Now, on the other side of things, Felipe Lins, he's had a pretty favorable list of matchups recently, right? Maxime Grishin, I just didn't think that Maxime Grishin had enough offense to threaten Lins. Like, I thought Lins was going to be able to push him back. I thought he was going to be able to damage him with big shots. And I also thought if he wanted to, El Monstro, Felipe Lins, could wrestle with him, right? I thought he could take him down. I thought he could just expose the fact that Maxime Grishin, pretty limited fighter, pretty old guy for the division, can get hurt, cracked, wobbled as well. You look at Ovince St. Preux, I called the knockout one in that fight. I just thought it was pretty obvious that Ovince St. Preux was past his sell-by date, was not taking the fights as serious, was showing up with a little bit more flab, a little bit less musculature, a little bit less definition. So for me, I thought Felipe Lins was back on the sauce. I thought Ovince St. Preux was not taking it very serious, and that for me was enough to go with Felipe Lins in that fight. Marcin Prachnio. We've seen Prachnio get back on track now, right? He's not a complete washout, right? We've seen Marcin Prachnio go out there and get a win his most recent UFC fight, but Felipe Lins was able to use his leverage, his strength, his physicality to get on top. And MMA Jesus says, are you attempting to cap fights now that USADA is gone and UFC's testing policy is clearly less serious? Yeah, man. I've always looked for fighters that I think are on the sauce, right? I think part of it used to just be fighters with more money had more opportunity to skirt the testing, right? And so if you have money, if you had already gotten that 50,000 bonus, if you already had a great backing, a great manager, great financials, things like that, I thought it made a big difference for a lot of these guys. Whereas now I think USADA pulling back and the UFC transitioning back to commission testing and all those things makes it a lot more like an IQ test for these fighters. I do think I'm seeing more and more fighters on the gear. And I also believe when you look at these guys, a lot of times they were just cycling, I think, more frequently, whether they were on or off, whether they could be in camp or out of camp and this kind of thing. I think now we see a lot of times where the fighters are just more blatant, more brazen about their use. And like Katlyn Chookagain saying that thing about Gordon Ryan telling her the same stack, like it just seemed, to me like so on the nose, such a post USADA commentary. Lins pulling out of that Azamat fight shows that he has high IQ. True. Azamat, the professional. You ain't want to mess with that guy right now. Who's your top three obvious Reuters right now? That's a great question. And I don't want to call anybody out personally, but I mean, I think the idea that somebody like Jailton Almeida goes from 205 to 265 muscle, he looks like he's a freaking science experiment, right? And he's not the only one. I think Felipe Lins on this card, also on sauce. More power to him, right? If we're in a business where people are breaking down, oh my God, Loic was on insane roids last week, dude. His arms were like popping off of his shoulders. That guy's muscles had muscles coming out of muscles. But I look at Ion Cutelaba, and I don't think I put it past him either, right? Training at Extreme Couture. I'm not sure that he is sauced up, but he's definitely looked like a guy who's come sauced in the past. Would not be surprised here. So the thing is, last time out, the Tanner Boser win, not sure exactly how I rate that. You look at his recent losses, Kennedy and Nzechukwu, big guy, strong guy, can't really fault him there. Johnny Walker, the fact he got out grappled by Johnny Walker, I do think limb length had everything to do with that, but also Johnny Walker's not the best grappler in the division. That is a little bit concerning. Ryan Spann, basically a one-note guillotine threat, was able to get him there as well. Devin Clark is a guy that has been struggling, right? He's been on hard times recently in the UFC. That was his most recent win. Lost to Dustin Jacoby, had the draw with Dustin Jacoby where he gassed out after the first round there as well. So Cutelaba, for me, just a very difficult guy to cap. But what I will say, 6-8-1 in the UFC, not a very good resume, not a very good record. Could be one loss away from getting cut from the company at any time. I think they keep him around because he goes out there and puts on swang and banging fights and just doesn't really care about his health and safety, right? They ran him out there against Ankalaev to get flatlined after he had already done the shaky legs the first time, right? So I think that he is an interesting guy. He's a fun guy, but I don't think I could really trust Cutelaba at chalk prices either. So for me, it would probably be dog or pass, but Linz is a little bit older. I don't like how he reacts. Sometimes he can get overwhelmed, but Linz no sub wins in the UFC. Can he get his first? Yes, he could. Yes, he does have grappling accolades. Yes, he's known as El Monstro. If you look, he's got more wins by knockout in his career, but he does have 4 wins as a professional via submission, including against Caio Alencar in 2018. He got the guillotine choke back in the PFL. So this is a guy who won the PFL, I believe, back in the day, certainly competed at a high level in that company, won the $1 million. And I think that he kind of came to the UFC, not giving a shit, not on steroids. Now I think he's back on the steroids, back at a weight class at 205 where he can give a shit and get some wins. So is he a long-term guy for the UFC? No, he's going to eventually fall off. He's going to run into somebody really tough, maybe a Vitor Petrino or somebody like that. But I think Linz could go out there and submit a guy like Cutelaba, honestly. I've just never really been sold on Cutelaba. But in any case, guys, we can move to the next fight here. We've got a heavyweight matchup where Robles de Spain is taking on Josh Parisian, and a 35-year-old against a 34-year-old here. Everybody is thinking that Robles de Spain is going to get the job done. I can just level with you guys. I haven't seen enough of Robles to tell you a strong opinion one way or the other. What I can tell you is I'm not a Josh Parisian guy, right? I look at Josh Parisian and I say to myself, with all due respect, this guy looks like a tall glass of milk to me. He does not seem like a very serious athlete. Losing to Martin Buday via knockout is a terrible look for your career. Jamal Pokes, losing to him via unanimous decision, that's fine, but it's not a great look for your career. It does show a certain level where you're at in this heavyweight division. Alan Baudot, frankly, had no right to lose that fight. Alan Baudot was the much better fighter. Alan Baudot just doesn't have the heart. He did not have the will to continue there. He beat the absolute tar out of him in the first round. It looked like the fight could have been stopped to me, but Alan Baudot was not able to sustain that pace. And so you saw Parisian storm back on him, get the win. Otherwise, he would be on a 4-fight skid because the fight before that, he got power humped in the face by Dante Mays for 5 minutes, and then he got finished brutally via TKO round 3, elbows from the crucifix. Honestly, Dante Mays, Martin Buday, Jamal Pokes, these are some low-end guys in this heavyweight division. My guy, Parker Porter, dominated him, went out there, got the takedowns, got on top of him. Just not a great look for Josh Parisian, any which way you want to do it. The Roque Martinez fight, guys, split decision. I thought that could have went to Roque Martinez. So, I truly have not liked anything I've ever seen from Josh Parisian. But let us give credit where it's due, because Josh Parisian, he got a win. Where was this, man? Over Greg Rebello. I believe he was plus 500 in that fight against Greg Rebello. So there has been one time in the past where this guy, Josh Parisian, came through as a massive dog, right? If you look, I believe he's got a positive ROI as an underdog despite losing like 50 times, just because that time was such a big underdog cash. So I think that Josh Parisian is just not a kind of guy I believe in. He's not a kind of guy that I want to bet. Now, on the other side, Robles de Spain, he's being priced like he's already won the fight, right? He's being priced based on his athletic upside. The danger is it's a mixed martial arts fight, right? So if he gets taken down and the tall glass of milk is laying on top of him, he could end up looking like a scrub, right? Or he could gas out in 5 minutes and then not have anything left like an Alan Baudot. But frankly, I think that this guy, Despain, has more on paper that would suggest he's a good fighter, which would be the Taekwondo Olympic run, right? He's a guy that's competed in martial arts before. He can compete in striking fights. So yeah, I think Ronan makes a great point. Can't imagine putting money on a minus 400 4-0 debutant, but I really can't imagine putting money on Josh Parisian. I feel the exact same way. I think that if I was to get involved here, it would maybe be the under 1.5 rounds, something like that. I honestly think this Spain is going to finish him in 1.5, 2 minutes. I think he's going to blow through him. I think he's probably just too fast, too powerful, too confident. And I think that Josh Parisian is none of those things, So I think that he'd have to get lucky, or he'd have to, absorb a lot of damage and find a way to push through. And I don't really trust him to do that either. So for me, gonna go ahead and pick the Spain here to get the job done. Not breaking any news there. He is a substantial favorite, but I think he's going to get the job done via knockout in the first round. And I also will just say I haven't watched a lot of his cage time, right? I know it's very short. I'm going to go back and watch. But what I have done is I've watched some of his training footage. And I just think the athleticism, the speed, the movement, it's a lot different. I think he's a much higher quality caliber athlete. So for me, those are a few of the X factors, I think, that have contributed to this line. And I think they opened him such a substantial favorite so they could write money on the Josh Parisian side. That's how I see it. But in any case, guys, we can move to the next fight on the card. I just want to say shout out to everybody who's rocking with us. We're having a huge turnout tonight on the show. I appreciate each and every one of you guys that tuned in, whether you're tuning in on Twitter, on YouTube. I appreciate you guys watching, rocking with us. Make sure you get subscribed to the channel. We're talking fights here each and every week, trying to put you guys in a position to succeed. So far this year, over 10 units of profit, great ROI on the year as well. Well over 25% so far this year. So Lord willing, we'll keep it running this week into the pay-per-view, because we've got next up a flyweight matchup with Asu Almabayev taking on CJ Vergara. This is a flyweight fight, and it should be a good scrap. Asu Almabayev comes in with that nice 18-2 record, right? He's got that Kazakhstan flag. I like me a nice Kazakhstan fighter. And when I'm looking at this guy, CJ Vergara, CJ's a guy that I faded in the past, right? He was fighting my boy Tatsuro Taira. So you already know that had to be wraps. We had to have Tatsuro Taira ITD. I think we might have had him on the money line. Any which way to Sunday, we had our guy Tatsuro Taira that night. Ends up getting the armbar submission in round number 2. So well done for Tatsuro Taira there. However, we've also seen that this is a guy who's missed weight twice in the UFC. Not only against my boy Tatsuro Taira, he came in 4 pounds overweight there. He also came in 1.4 pounds overweight against O'Day Osborne in a loss. So both of his losses in the UFC, this guy showed up overweight. Then he takes on Clayton Rodriguez. Clayton Rodriguez, guys, at the time, it was considered a great win. But now let's look at Clayton's recent run of fights, right? And kind of draw that apart. Farid Basharat dominated him in the first round. He beat Shannon Ross, the guy with the worst chin in the UFC. CJ Vergara lost the split decision there, beat Santo Curatolo on the Contender Series. So that win seemed like a great win at the time, but really we got to see more evidence that Clayton Rodriguez is at this level before we get too invested in this, right? When you look at the Daniel Lacerda fight, the Vinicius Salvador fights, those are two spots where, Vinicius Salvador, pretty low-level guy in the division, not very proven at this level, 14-5 overall. Daniel Lacerda could not get a win, could not buy a win in the UFC, right? So this is a guy that had as many opportunities as I can remember without getting a win in the promotion, and he was never able to get over the hump. Who was the closest that he came to beating in anybody in the UFC? CJ Vergara. He was dancing. He was on Dream Street. He was rocked. He was wobbled. He was moving all over the place. CJ Vergara was running in that fight, and then he found his footing. He was able to get back on top. He is a tough guy, right? Like, Vergara is not an easy guy to get out of there, but he can be hurt. He can be rocked. He can be wobbled, and he can also be dominated in the grappling. We've seen at times in the past on his regional scene, he got taken down instantly, back take finish. That's what told me that it was going to be wraps against Taira. And the same thing happened there. O'Day Osborne's a guy that's really been on the struggle bus, honestly, at the flyweight division in the UFC. Has not been exemplary in this division. He was able to get the win over him as well. So I think that he's kind of beaten some of the lower echelon guys in this division. And I think Asu Almabayev is trending towards the upper end of the division. Is he there yet? No, but he's got 18-2 on his resume. He's got a win over Ode Osborne, common opponent between these two guys. So for me, I just like more of what I'm seeing from Almeida. He seems like a guy who's moving in the right direction. And for Vergara, I think he's been lucky to get the record he has in the UFC. I think he's a tough enough guy, but I think his skills won't be able to pay the bills at the higher echelon. And I think he's got to find a way to outlast this kid, break him on cardio, hurt him early. He does have some good knees to the body. He does have some strong strikes, but he just doesn't always have the confidence to stay in the pocket and throw because he can be hurt, rocked, wobbled himself. So for me, I think Almeida a little more confident, a little bit more prepared, a little bit more well-rounded with his skill set. I think he should be able to get it done, but it should be a good scrap nonetheless. Shout out to the chat here. Herb Dean, the gold standard, says, could be totally wrong, but feel like guys who aren't disciplined enough to make weight might be more likely to get on PEDs now. Yeah, that's possible. But also, if you're going to be on the PEDs, it costs some money. It costs some discipline as well, right? Maybe have to work with the right doctor, the right scientist to get it right. And, if the guys don't have the right discipline, maybe they're not going to have that. Maybe they're not going to invest in themselves and their career like that. So a couple of things to notice. Fight to end in 60 seconds. I'm guessing you're talking about Robles. Despain is only plus 200. Oh my goodness, disgusting. And then looking back, I think that we've had a lot of great contributions from the chat. So shout out to all you guys. Is Liam a flyweight or a strawweight? My brother, I'm neither. I'm at least a featherweight. But who knows? Who knows? In the modern UFC, I'd want to get down to featherweight for sure. But I compete typically when I grapple 155, 160. That's what I typically do. So I appreciate you asking, my brother. But yeah, we don't really have names for the weights in jiu-jitsu, right? But last but not least, guys, let's move along to the first fight, the curtain jerker. 14 fights done. Here we go. Joanne Calderwood, Joanne Wood, whatever you'd like to call her, we will, be seeing. But we've got Marina Moroz on the other side here. This is a rematch, of course, guys. This fight did take place back in the day. We had, oh, goodness. Am I crazy here? Yeah, no, Joanne Wood back in 2015. That's what I was thinking. This has got to be from a long time ago. And, man, Marina Moroz, way back in 2015, she was able to go out there and get the first round armbar win over Joanne Wood. And that is what the story of Joanne Wood's career, right? She's basically been armbarred in most of the pivotal fights of her career. If we go back and look at the time, that was a 5-0 Marina Moroz against a 9-0 Joanne Wood. So Joanne Wood at the top of her powers, at the at her best, right? Undefeated, still lost the fight. And now it seems like Joanne Wood has been just on a steady decline to me, throughout her run. Last time out, she gets the split decision win over Luana Carolina. I thought it was a close fight. I thought it could have went either way. But prior to that, submitted in the first round by Alexa Grasso. That was at UFC Columbus, right? I was there in person. Alexa Grasso, the former champion, the future champion, I should say, at the time, snapping on that rear naked choke, finished her with ease there. Talia Santos, my girl, she now signed with the PFL. Should have got that plus 400 when she fought Valentina, but instead, we weren't able to cash it. She was able to cash against Joanne Wood, submitted her in the first round via rear naked choke. Jennifer Maia, guys, back in the day, I think she was supposed to fight for the title, right? She's supposed to fight Valentina Shevchenko. Shevchenko gets injured. She says, that's fine. I'll go fight somebody else anyway. Gets armbarred in the first round. This girl just can't get away from that first round submission loss. And I think Joanne Wood is probably going to retire soon, right? I don't think she's very competitive anymore. I don't think she's very serious about her career. And I think on the other side of things, Marina Moroz, people talk about the OnlyFans fade and they don't, take her super serious. She is on a 2-fight skid coming into this, but last time out, guys, Karine Silva, brutal matchmaking. Karine Silva, scary girl, very violent, very capable in all positions, right? She's powerful on the feet, but she's actually really dangerous on the ground. And that's where Marina Moroz typically likes to be. So she went for the takedown there, gets caught in the guillotine choke, tough sledding, right? Jennifer Maia, common opponent, right? Jennifer Maia, sound with her grappling, sound with her wrestling. That's basically where she's best in the UFC. She was able to get a takedown on Valentina Shevchenko as well, right? So you look, that is kind of understandable and justifiable. And I think what the UFC is doing with this matchmaking is trying to get Marina back on track, trying to give her a winnable fight against an opponent that, number one, she's beaten before. She has a lot of confidence. She can go out there and beat again, but also she can leverage her skills where she's superior, which is that grappling and that wrestling. Most of the time against these two most recent opponents, she hasn't been able to leverage those skills. And so she's looked like a very average fighter. I think that Joanne Wood, last time out, didn't have to worry about her wrestling and her grappling against Luana Carolina. That is why she looked all right. That's why she got the win. I think in this fight, unfortunately, it's a little too late. I don't think she can change the fundamental flaws about her game. I think her back taking, her ability to give the back to her opponents is horrible. She gives it up too easily and too frequently. And I also believe that when you look, even if she's on top, even if she gets to a good position, she's still in danger, right? She still leaves her arms just dangling, draped, ready to be armbarred. And frankly, we've seen a number of times people were able to capitalize on that fact. So for me, this is a spot where I do lean Marina Moroz getting the job done once again. And I think she should be able to finish somebody like Joanne Wood if she still wants to be serious, if she still wants to be competitive. I don't think that Joanne Wood meets those criteria necessarily. So for me, I think that, this is probably a retirement type of fight for Joanne. If I hear that in the media, that would only add to my confidence. So interesting fight, but I just cannot trust Joanne Calder-Wood. I haven't seen anything from her in her recent performances that's made me confident. But it's also not a fight where I feel, compelled to get to the window. Both of these women are a little bit lower on in their career. She ain't hitting the gilly on Moroz, that's for sure. Moroz only been subbed by that one gilly from a freak. Shout out to you, brother. So there we have it. 905 people rocking with us live, guys. I can't thank you enough. Huge show for the brand, huge show for the people. Thank you to everybody who joined us on Twitter. If you haven't found me there, find me at Liam Picks Fights. Always trying to drop knowledge throughout the week for the people. Also announcements, things about the show. So appreciate everybody that rocks with us over there. Going to put out this show on podcast platforms as well. Been a little bit stagnant with the podcast. It's an extra layer to the production process for me, but we're getting back after it this week. We got the pay-per-view. Timestamps are coming. So if you guys came here late to the party, no problem. We'll have timestamps back up as well for your viewing convenience. If you guys don't mind, go ahead and drop a like on this video. Get subscribed to my YouTube channel. I put a lot of time, effort, and energy into these breakdowns, as well as into my resources, my research each week. On Patreon, I'm going to be going live later to do a quick breakdown as well about how I use betting splits to my advantage to try and bet on mixed martial arts, the things that they can tell you, the things that they can't tell you, and things that I've used as lessons over time. So if you're interested in any of that, it's in the Patreon, which is in the description box down below. And I do a navigation document for every UFC card every week. I put a lot of time, effort, and energy into it. It's got independent handwritten notes that I've done over the years, taking tape studies of these fighters by my own physical eyes, writing it all down, what I'm seeing, what I think about it. So that's what I do every week. I compile all my notes. I also take the social media A-side report. I make that every week. I make the previous performance and odds range document every week fresh. So we're right back to work, and I will also have a full card preview for every fight on the card. That's what I do every single week. And last week, Ayman Zahabi, plus 600. We told you why. We told you what. We told you he was going to win by decision. We told you he was better with the hand. So whether or not I'm right on any one pick, I can never guarantee. But what I can guarantee is effort, energy, hustle each and every week. And I'm always back to put my ass in the jackpot. So I'll get it wrong. I'll get it right. But I'll always be here again next time, and I hope you will be too. God bless you all. Enjoy those fights. Come back next time. We're having all the same fun again. Thanks, everybody.